It is incumbent upon that person to recognise the misconduct and to apologise for it. If members produce what they regard as evidence, of course it is order. If members produce what they regard as evidence, it is order. If members produce what they... I'm in the middle of... No, what I say to the honourable gentleman, the member for Braintree, is please have the courtesy to allow me to respond to the right honourable lady's point of order. If evidence is produced, it will be considered, and I will take professional advice, as fair-minded people would expect me to do. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Mr. Speaker, could you confirm that it is not acceptable parliamentary language to call a woman a stupid woman in this House? And as regards the point of order from the Leader of the House, may I add the words, me too?
The answer is, I've already made the response to that point perfectly clear. So, forgive me, I treat the honourable lady with courtesy and respect, and she's perfectly entitled to raise a point of order. But of that point, I have already treated. Point of order, James Cleverly.
In the leaflet you distributed, you make the point, very rightly, that we are all honourable members. Our word is therefore evidence. I saw it, sir. I saw him say it.
Yes, I am not seeking to refute what the honourable gentleman is saying. I am simply saying I didn't witness it. The Clerk of the House and the other clerks at the table didn't witness it. And I cannot be expected immediately it's no good somebody waving something at me. I cannot be expected immediately to pronounce guilt or innocence. No, I can't be expected immediately to pronounce. I can't be expected. What I reiterate to the honourable order, I'll deal with it in a moment. What I reiterate to the honourable gentleman is that members are responsible for their own conduct and should apologise if they have committed a misdemeanour. It's no good a member standing by the chair and trying to show me something. I would say what I say to the honourable gentleman is that the Leader of the Opposition will have heard of the allegations that have been made, he will have heard the allegations, if the right honourable gentleman, in the light of those, chose to come to the House and to respond, I'm sure that would be appreciated by the House. Point of order, Dame Margaret Beckett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the observations made by the right honourable lady opposite, and I hope I vow to no one in my wish to see the courtesies of this House observed. But do you believe that it is in order for what appears to be becoming almost an orchestrated riot to take place?
Order. No, I'm sorry. Honourable and right honourable members have raised points of order, and they have been heard and they have been answered. The notion that the right honourable lady stands to raise a point of order and is then shouted down is order. Don't know to me. That is exactly what an attempt was being made to achieve, and it's not going to work. Point of order, Dame Margaret Beckett.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, it does seem to me, and I have been in this House for some many years, that an attempt is presently being made to shout you down. Yeah. There is much serious business before this House, and I would be astonished if a single one of our constituents does not view these scenes with utter contempt.
Well, I thank the right honourable lady for what she has said. Yes, of course, I'll come to the other members. Point of order, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that this has raised some significant upset on certainly on our side, and I suspect in some of the women in ours. I said the issue of the leader of the opposition being alleged to have called someone a stupid woman, our Prime Minister of our country, a stupid woman, has clearly caused high feeling. It is also clear that many honourable and right honourable members have evidence to show you, and I'm really grateful that you're willing to look at that and then to take the advice that you need before coming back to the House. Can I ask within what time frame you expect to be able to do so?
Yes, that's order. Order, that's a very reasonable point of order, and the answer is, I reiterate that I am happy to look at that evidence, if that evidence exists. Order, I don't need the honourable gentleman to chanter. I don't need the intervention of the honourable gentleman, which doesn't advance matters. What I say to the honourable lady with courtesy is that I've heard a point of order, I am willing to consider that evidence, and I would come back on the matter as advised by the clerk after the 2 statements to the House. That seems perfectly reasonable. We have 2 statements to follow. If the evidence exists, it can be looked at, and a response can be provided, and we can take the matter from there, but it can perfectly reasonably wait and should sensibly do so until the 2 statements have been delivered to the House and questioning has taken place on them. Point of order, Sir Oliver Heald.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to you for looking at the evidence. I think they call it VAR in football. But when you come back, would it be possible for the House authorities to have contacted the office of the Leader of the Opposition to make sure that he's present to hear your ruling?
Let's wait to see. If I have a ruling, it would be a great courtesy if the Leader of the Opposition were here, and I very much hope that he will be. And I note what the right honourable gentleman has said. Point of order, sir. Point of order, Dr. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Calling anybody a stupid woman is not acceptable. Can I endorse the words of my honourable colleague opposite that also what is important if we want to encourage a wide range of people to get involved in politics, that we have cool heads, accessible processes and an honest way of proceeding, and that right now the most important thing for this House is to be able to go away, look at the evidence and get on with doing our job. So, Mr. Speaker, please can you tell us how do we move on to the next bit of business?
The answer is, I don't need the honourable gentleman continually ranting. It's perfect. Order. Don't argue the toss with me, Mr. Hoare. I will call the points of order when I'm... Order! I'll call them when I'm ready. What I say to the honourable lady is that the best way in which to proceed is to move to the statements, and I will treat of further points of order in the circumstances. Don't forget, I was not aware of this alleged evidence, and it has been brought to light by points of order. But the sooner the points of order come to an end, the sooner we can proceed with the next business of the House of Commons. Point of order, I will come to the honourable gentleman. Point of order, Mr. Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you've used the word perfectly properly, evidence, on a number of occasions. Certainly, I think a number of us will have seen on a variety of Twitter feeds clips, which anybody who has a basic lip-reading skill will understand what the Labour leader had to say about my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. Sir, will you undertake to take into evidence things which people have tweeted out to show that,
no, I've got the point. Yeah. Come on, quickly.
And indeed to take the footage taken by the officials of this place in terms of television.
I don't honestly think that added much, frankly. I think the commitment was pretty clear. But yes, I'm very happy to provide the honourable gentleman the assurance that he seeks. Point of order, Mr. David Morris.
Mr. Speaker, I've got the utmost respect for your position and the chair. if you look at what's been put forward in evidence and you come back with a judgment, would you please call the honourable gentleman back to the chamber so that we can hear the full evidence of what's been put forward?
I think I rather indicated that I expected that to happen. So if the honourable gentleman seeks the assurance that I would expect the Leader of the Opposition to be here, the answer is yes. And I'm saving the right honourable gentleman up. It'd be a pity to squander him. A point of order, Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. When you have seen the video replay, and thank God for video replays, and you decide to come back to the House, sir, do you have the power to call the Leader of the Opposition back to make sure that he is here to face us?
The short answer to the honourable gentleman is that technically I do not have that power, but I think it reasonable to suppose in the circumstances that the Leader of the Opposition would return to the chamber. I think that is an entirely reasonable assumption. It's not for me to get into that until the evidence has been assessed, but it is reasonable to suppose that the right honourable gentleman would return to the chamber. A point of order, Mr. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the avoidance of doubt, I'm not taking part in an orchestrated riot, but I would like politely to ask a question. I think my right honourable friend was quite right. In these circumstances, you should consult the video referee. And I think you will find that the video evidence is overwhelming. Earlier, the honourable member for Bassett Law made a very powerful point at Prime Minister's questions about anti-Semitism. And there was a great hear around the chamber. And none of us, on any side of this House, would countenance an anti-Semitic statement, particularly made at the dispatch box of the Commons. If we're not going to have anti-Semitic statements, Mr. Speaker, we cannot have misogynistic statements either.
I agree with the right honourable gentleman 100%. I agree with him for the avoidance of doubt and benefiting by repetition 100%. If we have concluded the points of order, of which it's pretty clear I have attempted to treat in detail, we come now to the first of the two ministerial statements. Statement the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Sajid Javid.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the UK's future border and immigration system after we leave the EU. We all heard the public's concerns about immigration in the run-up to the EU referendum. These were concerns held by many voters on both sides of the debate. The result of that referendum was clear. The UK will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. This means that we can end freedom of movement, so that for the first time in more than 40 years, we will be able to say who can and who cannot come into this country. This is a historic moment, but let's be clear. The United Kingdom has a proud history of being an open and welcoming nation, and this will not change. As a son of immigrant parents, I know full well the contribution they, like many other migrants, made to the community that I grew up in. We recognise and value the contribution of immigration and the contribution it has made to our society, our culture, our economy, and our communities, and this cannot be overstressed. How it has helped to deliver, for example, vital public services. It has brought new perspectives, expertise and knowledge, stimulating growth and making us all more tolerant, outward-looking nation that we are today. Britain is going to stay open for business. We will continue to welcome talented people from every corner of the globe. And we have been very clear to the 3 million EU nationals already here. We value hugely the contribution that you have made to this country. Deal or no deal, we want you to stay and we will protect your rights. The future system is about making sure immigration works in the best interests of the UK. We are absolutely not closing our doors. We are simply making sure that we have control over who comes through them, ensuring, as we committed to do in our manifesto, that we are able to bring annual net migration down to more sustainable levels. Today, Mr. Speaker, today we published a white paper setting out the government's proposals for doing this through a single, skills-based immigration system, that will seize the unique opportunities enabled by the end of free movement. Copies are available for honourable and right honourable members in the vote office. I would like to highlight the key proposals and principles within it to the House. Firstly, free movement will come to an end. Tomorrow, we will introduce the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU Withdrawal Bill to implement this. It will make EEA and Swiss nationals and their family members subject to UK immigration control, and it will protect the status of Irish nationals. This means that in the future, everyone other than British and Irish citizens will need to get UK permission before they can come here. Secondly, it will be a single immigration system for all nationalities. The existing automatic preference for EU citizens will end. This approach will give everyone the same chance, regardless where they are from, levelling the playing field to welcome the most talented people from anywhere in the world. And thirdly, it will be a skills-based system, giving priority to those with the skills that we need. We are taking this approach to ensure that we can attract the brightest and the best people to the UK, those who will help our economy flourish. This follows advice that is being commissioned by the government from the Independent Migration Advisory Committee on the impact of European migration on the UK economy and society. We believe this is a fair and it will help drive up wages and productivity across our economy. Following these three principles, we are acting to make the future immigration system work. For those coming to our country, for businesses, for our public services, and for the UK as a whole. Our approach will maintain protections for British workers while cutting bureaucracy. And fundamental to this will be a new route for skilled workers to ensure that employers can access the talent that they need to compete on the world stage. There will be no cap on numbers and no requirement for the highest skilled workers to undertake a resident labour market test, and there will be a minimum salary threshold. We are also creating a time-limited, short-term workers route to ensure businesses have the staff that they need to fill the jobs as they adapt to a new immigration system. We will ask the MAC to keep this scheme under review so that it ensures a smooth transition. This route will be open to seasonal and low-skilled workers, along with high-skilled workers who need to come to the UK for longer than the current business visitor visa rules allow. Those who arrive under this scheme will have no rights to access public funds, settle, or to bring dependents. The White Paper sets out our initial proposals to allow these short-term workers to come to the UK for 12 months at a time, followed by a year-long cooling-off period to prevent long-term working. And we will be engaging extensively with businesses and with stakeholders on the length of the stay and the cooling-off period to make sure that we get this right. These proposals will give protection to British workers, but we have recognised that immigration alone cannot be the solution, so we will continue as a government working in partnership with business to invest in and improve the productivity and skills of the UK workforce. Mr. Speaker, our world-class universities will also benefit from the proposed new system. There will be no limits on the number of international students who will come to and continue to encourage them to come and study here. And we will make it easier for graduates to stay and to work. This will widen the talent pool for businesses and boost economic growth. Our plans are about opening Britain up for business rather than creating new red tape. So the future immigration system will be quick and easy to use. We will introduce a streamlined application process for those that are visiting or coming to work or coming to study, and this will use the very latest technology. This will improve the experience visitors and travellers have when they are crossing the border. We will also make it possible for more people to use e-gates. At the same time, we will improve security at the border by introducing an electronic travel authorisation scheme and phasing out the use of insecure national identity cards. We are proposing a single, skills-based immigration system that will be fit for the future, one that is flexible to accommodate the trade deals that we agree with the EU and with other countries. It will operate from 2021 and will be phased in to give individuals, businesses and the government the time that is needed to adapt. This means that individuals do not need to make immediate changes and businesses do not need to rush through plans based on guesswork about the future system. Mr. Speaker, the Immigration White Paper outlines the proposals for the biggest change to our immigration system in a generation. However, it is important to note that it is not the final word. Rather, it is a starting point of a national conversation on a future immigration system. And I'm pleased to announce that the government will be launching a year-long programme of engagement across the UK to ensure that a wide range of views are heard. And I'm confident that all the measures that have been outlined today will ensure that the UK continues to flourish outside the EU, that the future immigration system is geared towards controlling who can come here and for what purpose, reducing net migration while ensuring the brightest and the best can work and study here, that it will boost our economy and it will benefit the British people. We are building a fair and sustainable immigration system that answers the concerns people have rightly had about free movement, an immigration system that is designed in Britain, made in Britain and serves our national interest. I commend this statement to the House.
Diane Abbott.
I would like to thank the Home Secretary for early sight of the statement. As the whole House knows, since 2016 referendum, politics have been convulsed by the debate about Brexit. And in recent days, we've seen ever more heightened convulsions. And at the heart of the debate, as far as many of our constituents are concerned, has been issues around migration. That is why it is a disgrace that it's taken the government so long to produce this long-promised white paper. It is almost a year late, and this is entirely because of internal disputes in Cabinet. The whole House knows that when we leave the single market, freedom of movement falls. The Labour Party set that out in our manifesto, and it remains our position. And then there will be an urgent need to fashion a new and hopefully fairer immigration system. But the important thing is, going forward, we do not base the new immigration system on some of the myths of the past. The whole House heard the Prime Minister say that the government was still committed to reducing migration to tens of thousands, a target that has never been met, will never be met, and is a pretext for anti-immigrant measures. But many members of the House will have heard the Home Secretary on the radio today repeatedly refusing to commit himself to the tens of thousands target. So which is it? Where does the government stand? Are you going to continue with a bogus and unachievable target? Or are you going genuinely to try and shape an immigration system which meets the needs of the society? And I would say to the Home Secretary that if he is abandoning the commitment to a formal target in the tens of thousands, if he is allowed to abandon that commitment, that would be welcome. This was a target which was a purely political device designed to stress the government's intent to crack down on immigration when the Conservatives felt under pressure from UKIP. But the House will wait to see what the Home Secretary's attitudes to targets, what it means in practice. The danger is the Home Secretary will abandon formal, in principle, adherence to targets, but the Home Office, particularly hearing, as it will have heard, what the Prime Minister has to say, will continue to function in the same way with all the distortions and all the unfairness and all the inefficiencies that arbitrary targets lead to. Let me also say that on this side of the House, I support a single immigration system for all nationalities. To my certain knowledge, nothing drove pro-leave sentiment amongst voters of Commonwealth origin, nothing drove it more than the sense that they were disadvantaged in relation to immigration compared to EU nationals. So if Brexit produces nothing else, it ought to produce a system which moves away from that unfairness. We should be a country which treats the doctor from Poland in the same way as we treat a doctor from Pakistan. I would also wish to ask the Home Secretary, is he aware of the concern that the uncertainty about the government's intentions and the delays in producing the white paper have produced amongst EU citizens, their friends, their families and their employers? Is the Home Secretary able to tell us when we will know what the minimum salary threshold will be? There is much concern that the minimum salary threshold will be at 30,000, which would actually rule out healthcare workers, social care workers, technicians, and would be very damaging both to the private and public sector. So when will we know what the minimum salary threshold will be? And as for the arrangement that he set out in a statement about time-limited temporary short-term workers who would have no rights to access public funds, settle or bring dependents. They would come for 12 months at a time, followed by a year-long cooling-off period. That might suit some sectors, notably agriculture, but it's a very alarming prospect for most employers because it will not allow them to establish the continuity of employment, which is vital for delivering their services, whether in the private or the public sector. And can I ask the Home Secretary, does he really think that the Home Office has the capacity to change its established ways of working and its unofficial targets, which it was clearly working towards and helped to contribute to the Windrush scandal? Does the Home Secretary accept that on immigration he cannot have it both ways? He cannot talk about an outward-looking global Britain and meeting the needs of society and employers. He cannot do that and also be part of a government with a rhetoric of cracking down on migration, a rhetoric, I might add, that implicitly denigrates the parents of many of us in this House. He cannot be part of a government with photocalls at airports to stress how they are cracking down on migrants. He cannot have it both ways. If he wishes to speak for a government which is genuinely outward-looking, which is genuinely global in its outlook, he needs to move away definitively from that anti-migrant rhetoric. He needs to take steps to dismantle the hostile environment, much of which was implemented under this government. And ministers opposite can say that the Labour Party in government sometimes brought forward immigration legislation which was unfair and unsustainable. I should know I voted against all of it. But what we are... So, thank you. So please don't come to the dispatch box and make that point. So many of us on the front bench voted against those items of legislation again and again. The question for this government is not what previous governments did, but what you are going to do. On an immigration, rhetoric about global Britain is not enough. You need to dismantle the hostile environment and you need to create a system which is both fair to migrants, fair to employers and fair to the society. The Windrush scandal upset society as a whole and members on both sides of the House. But it wasn't an aberration. It was a consequence of a way at looking at migrants which was essentially negative and was reflected, sadly, in legislation passed under more than one government. This system that he has set out in his statement will not, I think, meet the needs of migrants for certainty. It will not meet the needs of employers for a stable, skilled workforce. And above all, this statement, although it may read well to people that want to see migration cracked down on, this statement does not meet the need of the hour. Brexit offers, if it offers nothing else, the chance to put in place an efficient, no one that deals with the Home Office nowadays can say that it's universally efficient, an efficient, a fair, and a non-discriminatory immigration system which meets the needs of the society. We should seize that opportunity. I believe that this white paper statement falls far short of that.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, Mr. Speaker, can I just start by thanking the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and for the conversation we had earlier in the day as well. And can I also just say at the start, we might not always agree on issues, including the approach to immigration that's set out in the white paper, but she has always approached these issues and debate with courtesy and respect. And that's great to see, and sadly not an attitude by every member of her front bench, as we've seen a moment ago, but certainly she has always shown that, and I may not see her across the dispatch box before the end of the year again, so I'd like to wish her and her team a happy Christmas. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady asked a number of important questions. I mean, first of all, she's emphasised quite rightly this whole point of making it clear that whatever happens when it comes to immigration, I think it's fair to say all parties are united in trying their way to make sure that we remain an open and welcoming country to migrants from across the world that come to the UK to work here, to study here, to indeed to visit here. And I think it's great to have a parliament that is almost universally accepting of that. You know, she, like me, is the child of first-generation migrants. Her parents, like mine and countless others, have made a huge contribution to this country and making it what it is. And that is what we should all celebrate and try to demonstrate more is the kind of thing that we want to see in our country. And I hope that as she and her colleagues have time to digest what's in the white paper, I appreciate it's just been published, that she will have time to look at it in a way that will hopefully convince her that it is demonstrating that openness. The Right Honourable Lady raised a number of other issues. She's used the phrase about slaying the myths of the past. And one important aspect of the white paper is that we've listened to the evidence, and there is still more listening to do, and that's why I've said at the end of my statement that there's work to be done over the coming year to make sure that we engage with other political parties, devolved authorities, with businesses and others. But the starting point of the evidence was the work that was done by the Migration Advisory Committee, which is completely independent of government. They did quite a detailed report. They went to every part of the UK. They listened and listened hard and presented their evidence. And we published that in full in September of this year. And much of that, not exclusively, but much of that is reflected in this white paper. The Right Honourable Lady specifically asked about targets. You know, we're committed to the Conservative Party manifesto for this Parliament, but let me be clear, this is about the future immigration system. It's about emphasising control, but bringing net migration down to more sustainable levels. There are no targets in this white paper. And the Right Honourable Lady then turned to questions about actually a point that she made, which I very much welcome her support for this principle, which is a principle at the heart of this new system, which is about it's an individual's skills and what they have to contribute, not their nationality. So no preference to any particular nationality. And to take the Right Honourable Lady's similar example, if it's a doctor coming to the UK or an engineer, it shouldn't matter to us if that doctor or engineer is from India or from France. What matters matters is what they have to contribute, what's in that individual, and that's at the heart of these proposals. And I think the Right Honourable Lady was quite right to highlight that principle. She asked me a question about the salary threshold. So this is for the high-skilled worker route. The Independent Migration Advisory Committee has, based on their evidence, they've suggested that that should be £30,000, the salary threshold. What we said is we've listened to the 30,000, but we need to do more work on this and have more extensive engagement until we come to a final figure. So it will not be set in stone at 30,000 at this point. We will have to have more engagement to make sure that we get that right and try to come up with a threshold that we believe that works for all parts of the UK. She also asked me about the short-term workers route, and one of the reasons we've included that in the white paper is just a recognition of, as we move away from freedom of movement, which I think all colleagues will see is a very easy system, let's say, to use it with hardly any paperwork or bureaucracy involved, to a new system where everyone requires permission. It is right that we have a transition, and part of the short-term workers scheme is part of that transition approach, and having a more balanced approach and recognising the needs of businesses across the country. And then lastly, the Right Honourable Lady mentioned the points around, again, about being open and welcoming, but about learning for the Home Office to learn lessons and change its approach wherever appropriate. Already the Right Honourable Lady will know earlier this year that we made changes to the current Tier 2 system, so under the current immigration system, to remove the doctors and nurses from the cab. And she also rightly raised the Windrush crisis and the issues around that. And there's been a process all year to learn lessons from that, what went wrong, and she's right to highlight that even the Windrush problems began under previous government. It continued under this government. It shouldn't have happened under any government, but it's right to learn the lessons, and the work that Wendy Williams is independently doing. I know she's been progressing on her report, and it will be a thorough, independent report, and she will go wherever she needs to get to the evidence, and that's, I think, will be an important moment for us to all learn lessons from that.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement? I haven't had a chance, obviously, like many, to read the white paper, but much of what he said today, I believe, moves in the right direction. He will, I hope, agree with me that one of the problems about discussing migration over the last 2 decades has been, any time it's mentioned, people immediately accuse those who ask about reducing it as racists, and we have to bring an end to that level of debate, which has led to much of the frustration that the Right Honourable Lady opposite referred to early on in the way this debate's been conducted. As one of those who voted leave, it was clear to me throughout that people didn't want an end to migration. What they wanted was controlled migration, and that is what I hope my right honourable friend delivers today. So when he's looking at this, the core bit, as far as I can see, that has caused the greatest problem in this has been the access to social security benefits for people coming in from European Union immediately. That has caused a big problem because many businesses, I'm afraid, have abused that process, getting them to come in, living often in quite squalid conditions and driving wages down for those who have much higher levels of costs. So my real question here is he prepared to deal with that issue and to make sure that that is not one of the ways of bringing in cheap labour? And when he gets lectured by businesses and by others who say the health service can't cope, we need to remind business that for the last 2 decades, and it's a very important point, Mr. They have failed.
The General's point may be important, but it does need to be framed in the form of a question. Briefly.
So will he accept from me that those businesses have failed to invest in training and skilling of the domestic population enough, with the result now that only 15% of those who start life at entry-level work will ever move beyond entry-level work?
Home Secretary.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for his the points that he's raised. And first of all, he's absolutely right to emphasise the need for control. And that was clearly one of the messages from the referendum result. It's about control. Like any other major developed economy, there's no reason why Britain shouldn't have control, but at the same time also be fair in its immigration approach. And on his particular point around access to benefits, what we have set out in this white paper, and I appreciate he hasn't had the opportunity to look at it in any detail yet, is that on the short-term firm workers route, for example, there will be no access, no right to public benefits, no dependents' rights, and again, a system that many other countries has followed, which I think, again, is a fair approach both to those people that come to the country to work, but also to the domestic population.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of his statement, and indeed the Immigration Minister for taking the time to speak to me earlier today as well. But, Mr. Speaker, these proposals will make us all poorer, economically, socially and in terms of opportunity. They do not signify a global Britain, but an inward-looking government and a Prime Minister still obsessed with net migration targets. Because when the government talks about taking back control of our borders, what it means is ripping up mutual rights to live, study, work and to enjoy family life across Europe, depriving future generations of the amazing opportunities that our generations have enjoyed. Free movement has been brilliant for our people and brilliant for Scotland and the United Kingdom too. And when the government talks about a skills-based system, it means nothing of this sort. It is, to all intents and purposes, a salary-based system. We are likely talking about the carers, key NHS workers, lab technicians, researchers, bricklayers and other essential workers that this country needs. So why is the government intent on slashing the family, social security and settlement rights of workers coming here under the income threshold? These proposals are degrading for workers, they are bad for employers and bad for community cohesion. And why is the Home Secretary intent on forcing businesses to endure the expense, the red tape and the dubious reliability of a Home Office immigration system when free movement has worked perfectly well? This is the opposite of cutting bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, will the Home Secretary confirm the revenue that this will cost the Treasury, and will he confirm what the analysis shows about lost growth to the economy? Finally, Mr. Speaker, these announcements will be utterly disastrous for Scotland, socially and economically. Has the Home Office modelled the effect that this will have on Scotland's population, economy and public finances? Does he seriously think reducing EU migration to Scotland, possibly by over 80%, is a good thing? Mr. Speaker, if this is the best the government can do, then there is no better illustration about why we need decisions on immigration to be in Scotland's hands.
Home Secretary.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman claims that having your own immigration system, ending freedom of movement, will make the country poorer. Well, he should maybe focus his attention on the number of other large developed countries, take Australia, Canada, United States, that have their own independent immigration systems, and they're not poorer because of that. So I just don't think his logic follows at all, Mr. Speaker. He also is arguing for continuing freedom of movement, and he should cast his mind back to just over 2 years ago when the British people voted to end it. The United Kingdom and Scottish citizens are members of the United Kingdom. They voted to end it. And then lastly, he raised the issue of the salary threshold. It is, when determining skill levels, it is perfectly reasonable to take in, as one of the factors that you take into account is salaries, but it shouldn't be based exclusively on that. And the MAC, if he cares to read the MAC's report from September of this year, it will give him a lot more evidence of why this is a perfectly reasonable approach.
Mr. Damien Green.
Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. He's addressed the central conundrum of immigration policy, which is how to have the necessary controls on the numbers while at the same time attracting not just our fair share, but preferably more than our fair share of the brightest and best from around the world to help our economy and our communities. But one issue which I hope he can address is that some of those brightest and best are not necessarily in high-paid professions. And how will his new system deal with those, I'm thinking particularly of sectors like social care, where we want some good, bright, best people from around the world coming, but who won't be probably over any kind of limit in terms of a salary? How are we going to continue to attract those people?
Secretary.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his comments? And I know he speaks with experience as a former immigration minister too. And he's asked a perfectly good question around how can we continue to attract the best and brightest, especially if we are focused too rigidly on salary. And one of the ways we intend to do that in the new system is to take a recommendation of the Migration Advisory Committee on shortage occupation lists as just one example, where we will actually take it further, make it more dynamic and responsive, and review it more regularly. But that will will allow, as it does in the current non-EEA immigration system, but in a much more effective way, allow us to set lower salary thresholds for those occupations that are in shortage.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll obviously look very closely at what the Home Secretary set out in the Immigration White Paper. We've obviously heard lots of different stories back and forth about what it would include, and I'm not sure we can entirely believe all the different things we've heard, given what we've seen in the disputes between him and the Prime Minister. But I want to ask him a very specific question about immigration enforcement at our border and in relation to no-deal planning, because the Permanent Secretary of his department told us on the Home Affairs Committee just a few weeks ago it is not part of our contingency planning to deploy the armed forces. And I pressed him on this and he said again, it is not part of our no-deal planning that we would deploy the armed forces, for example, at the border. Now, was the Permanent Secretary misleading the committee, or was this a surprise to the department this morning when they were told that the army could be deployed at the border for immigration enforcement and other devices?
Secretary.
Thank you. I can tell the honourable gentleman, of course there's no-deal planning going on in the Home Office as there is in any other department. We don't expect it, but we need to plan for all contingencies. We are hiring more border force officers. There will be a task force as well that's already being set up. And that, in fact, I think some of the new funding for those border force officers has been announced. As for use of soldiers, whether reservists or regular officers, there's a broader plan. It's not part of the Home Office's plan, but there's a broader plan to have, I think, up to 3,500 soldiers available for civil work as and when needed.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, there's a great deal to welcome, in my judgment, in the statement that the Home Secretary has delivered today. But will he bear in mind that it is completely inappropriate to pinch doctors and medical staff from developing countries? It is a form of reverse aid, and it is quite wrong. And when this does happen, will he discuss with the Development Secretary using part of the development budget to replace such staff on a 2-for-1 basis? And does he think that it is not right that we should grow the doctors and medical staff that we need in Britain, in which context we should welcome the increase in the last year of the number of doctors trained from 6,000 to 7,500?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend with experience raises a very important point. Of course, we cannot control who makes an application to come to the UK or who may or may not give them sponsorship, but still he raises a very important point of other ways that we might be able to help or reduce concern in this area, and one is certainly through our international aid budget, and the second is his issue around making sure that we are doing everything we can to train more doctors and nurses here in the UK.
Sir Edward Davey.
Speaker, will the Home Secretary accept that the Home Office and the Border Force already struggle to cope, and that over the next 3 years they must deal with 3 million extra cases of EU citizens? So will he then explain how he expects them to cope with this new temporary worker visa scheme involving tens of thousands of employers, many of them contacting the Home Office for the first time, with a 12-month churn of staff? Mr. Speaker, far from bringing back control, won't this just be chaos?
Well, I'll give 3 answers to the right honourable gentleman. And first of all, he mentions the settlement scheme for the 3 million plus EU citizens, and that is being separately staffed. There's more staff to be hired as well as the scheme properly rolls out, and a lot of the extra funding has already been allocated for that. Secondly, we will be using making the best use of technology. So, for example, we were expanding e-gate usage to 8 other nations, and that helps a lot as well. And then lastly, the new system doesn't actually come into place until 2021, which gives us more and enough time to prepare.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask a couple of points of clarification? The Home Secretary talked about this coming in from 2021. Can he say exactly when? Does he mean January? And then secondly, in between, up until that point, can he confirm to employers in my own constituency that there will be no change in the existing processes, systems and forms that they have to use for non-UK workers, whether from the EU or the non-EU worker schemes that they are part of. And then finally, if he's going to have a year-long consultation with the public, that will take to 2019. Obviously, then the government will want time to look at those results in 2020. Can he give me assurances that businesses in my community won't suddenly be given a cut-off point on a salary with just months to go before a new system is introduced in 2021?
Home Secretary. Mr. Speaker, can I tell my right honourable friend, first of all, on her first question, the new system, the plan is to bring it in from January 2021, so from the end of the implementation period. Of course, if the implementation period is extended, this obviously always assumes that when a deal scenario, then it could be later than that date, January 2021. She's asked for an assurance that there won't be any change in terms of employer checks between now and when the system comes in, and we're not planning any change that is, and the changes that are in here will only come in from 2021 onwards, so there will be no change, including for EU citizens, in terms of employer checks. And then also she's asked for an assurance that the salary threshold, when it's set, it won't be sudden. We will make sure through the work that we do that it is not a sudden change and businesses have time to prepare.
Mr. David Lammy.
The Home Secretary was right to pay tribute to his parents. His own father, a bus driver. My mother worked at Camden Town Tube Station, a generation that took so little and gave so much. They're like today's care workers, security guards and fruit pickers. He knows that they didn't earn anything like 30,000 in the prices of the 70s and the 80s. How is he going to look his children in the face and say that he slammed the door of opportunity behind him so that he and I could be in our seats today?
The Home Secretary. I mean, first of all, Mr. Speaker, what I'd say to the right honourable gentleman is that the door was closed on my parents and people from those Commonwealth countries that they and others came from in 1968 by the Commonwealth Citizenship Act, which was brought in by a Labour government. So it was a Labour government that closed that door. And no, he should. It's important because it's important that he actually has all the facts in front of him. But going forward, it is important that we continue to provide opportunities for people with multi-skill levels to come and help in the UK to settle and to study, and that is why we have a system, presented a system here that is both focused on the high skills, but also, he would have heard earlier, I talked about the short-term workers scheme as well, and there will be other routes as well.
Stephen Crabb.
Mr. Speaker, I understand my right honourable friend's emphasis on attracting high skills, but isn't it true that in recent years the British economy has been thirsty for new labour at all skills levels, and we want that to continue? And this is particularly true for those parts of the United Kingdom where the local population is getting older on average and where freedom of movement has actually been a really good and really important thing. So would my right honourable friend please make an effort to take evidence from all parts of the United Kingdom to really understand the way the local skills and labour markets operate so that we strike the right balance with our new policy?
Home Secretary.
What my right honourable friend emphasises, Mr. Speaker, is the importance to listen to all parts of the United Kingdom and make sure that the new system works for them all. And in that regard, there is a commitment in this white paper to look at, for example, extending the shortage occupation list to Wales, because there is a shortage occupation list for Scotland today, but not for Wales. And that is just one demonstration, I think, of how we can make sure this works for every part of the UK.
Hilary Benn.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. On the streamlined application process for those visiting, can the Home Secretary confirm that the millions of visitors who come to this country from the EU every year will in future have to apply for and receive a visa or a visa waiver? And if so, how much will it cost them?
Secretary.
So in the future, under this new system, all people entering the UK will require a form of visa or visa waiver. We will, probably not starting in 2021, because it will come later to fully develop the system, introduce, but I did refer to it into my statement, an electronic travel authority scheme, and that will apply to all visitors. The right honourable gentleman asked me about the cost. We have not yet determined what the cost of that ETA system would be.
Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a first-generation immigrant, can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement, which I feel this immigration white paper is a move from the 20th century to a much better future immigration system. In particular, I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for removing the annual limits on work visas and also on international students, both of which I lobbied for on behalf of the Wellcome Sanger Institute and Anglia Ruskin University, which serve my constituency. Could he elaborate on how removing the work visa cap in particular will give business certainty?
Yes, because my honourable friend will know, under the current non-EEA system, there is a cap of $20,700 a year with some exemptions to that. And what the work of the Migration Advisory Committee had shown is that actually having such a cap is not in our economic interest, and it is far better to control numbers in other ways that are more reflective of economic needs. And so removing that cap, I think, will lead to an economic boost, and also making it easier for students that have studied at our great universities to stay on, and if they can find the right level of job, I think is very welcome too.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He says he will protect the rights of EU citizens currently here. Does that include the continued right to work even after they leave the country for a period and then come back? And he says he's against increased red tape. Therefore, will he publish, as part of this consultation, a full impact assessment on the cost to the public purse and to businesses from whatever processes he sets up to implement these short-term visas?
Mr. Speaker, I can, under the EU settlement scheme, that first of all there will be a requirement, but there will be plenty of time of 2 years for individuals to register under that scheme, and that's whether they, however long they've been here, even if they've been here a day, and their rights will be guaranteed. And my understanding is that if they, once they have registered in the scheme, if they leave for more than 5 years, they will lose their rights, but inside that there's no change.
Tim Lawton.
Mr. Speaker, this white paper has been even more delayed than a Southern Rail train, but once it has arrived, I welcome many of the comments the Home Secretary has made, but can he explain to me why, given the move to a skills-based system and shortage occupation measures, we still need to have a net migration target below 100,000 or anything else, given that you cannot do anything about one side of that equation in any case? And can he also confirm that his preference will be to remove students from that net migration figure altogether, given the welcome comments he's made about students coming to the country to invent and innovate and employ?
Secretary.
Thank you. Can I remember the honourable gentleman asked me very recently whether we will publish the white paper before the meaningful vote, and we have. And so I think I told him we would try our best. And he's asked me about targets, and I mentioned that there are no targets in this white paper. It is a system that is designed to help bring net migration down overall, but there are no targets that are set in the new immigration system. And with respect to students, it is an area that we continue to look at, and I have asked the Migration Advisory Committee to do some more work.
Catherine West.
Speaker, the UK has had a long tradition of observing the 1951 Refugee Convention, and I wanted to ask the Home Secretary whether the government is currently minded to lift the ban on asylum seekers working in the UK.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to the 1961 Convention, and I think that commitment is shared across the House. On the particular issue of work, it is an issue that we have been looking at.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What are the implications of the UN agreement on migration that we've signed in Marrakesh?
Secretary.
I'll say to my right honourable, first of all, the lead on that is the Foreign Commonwealth Office. But in terms of implications, it is a completely non-legally binding agreement, so there are no implications directly in the UK.
Pat McFadden.
Speaker, immigration has benefited the UK.
And people, whether they have come from Europe or from the rest of the world, who've come here, have overwhelmingly come to work hard and make a positive contribution to this country. Can I ask the Secretary, the Home Secretary, on this question of numbers, what is his estimate of the effect on immigration from the rest of the world of restricting immigration from the rest of Europe?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, the first part of the point the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, made about immigration benefiting the UK, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I hope he agrees for my statement that was clear. It is important, though, in terms of when we talk about benefits, we should meet with her and discuss that.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the proposal set out by the Home Secretary to have an immigration system that gets the best talent from around the world for our economy and our public services. Will he also undertake in this piece of legislation to cover the loophole of descendants from the British Indian Ocean Territory whose rights have been abused for the best part of half a century?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that my honourable friend is very passionate about this issue. I know that he has championed it for a while. We have discussed it. Whilst it isn't something that's specifically addressed in the White Paper in terms of a future immigration system, I think he's right to continue raising this, and then we are right to continue to work with him to look at it.
Sammy Wilson.
I welcome the assurance that those who are living already in the UK will have their rights protected, and it is a great pity that the EU were prepared to use those people as a negotiating ploy in these negotiations. But could I ask the Secretary of State, what assurances can he give, given the cap of £30,000 which has been suggested in this paper, that areas like Northern Ireland will have access to labour from outside the United Kingdom if there are skill shortages which are required to keep production going in Northern Ireland?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the honourable gentleman for welcoming the scheme for the 3 million plus EU citizens that are here, whether in Northern Ireland or anywhere else in the UK. They are welcome to stay, and we indeed need them to stay. And so, and as I said earlier, and I'll say it again, it's got whether we have a deal or no deal, that scheme and their rights will be protected. On the specific issue of Northern Ireland and more regional shortages, what we have done in the White Paper is commit for the first time to a separate shortage occupation list for Northern Ireland, which I think will make a big difference.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too visited the Crick Institute this morning, and I'm sure that they, like I do, will welcome this White Paper, and I particularly welcome the consultation on the minimum salary requirements, because as my right honourable friend will know, scientists, researchers, but particularly technicians who contribute hugely to our economy aren't always rewarded in the most profitable way. Salary is not a proxy for skills. I know he gets that point, but we can't say it too often.
Home Secretary.
It's an important point that my honourable friend has emphasised. Whilst I think the logic of having a salary threshold is strong, it is also right that we look at cases where that won't quite work, and he's given an example of perhaps say take lab technicians where salaries can be say £21,000, and there are a variety of ways to try and deal with that in this White Paper, and I hope he will welcome this.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm one of those who's valued free movement, but I do welcome what the Home Secretary has said today about overseas students. Is he in a position yet to offer any relief to those students that he knows about who had their visas cancelled after being accused by an American firm, often wrongly accused, of having cheated in their English language tests?
Home Secretary.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments? And as he's pointed out in the White Paper, it's making it even easier for students once they've completed their studies to stay and continue to contribute to the UK and to settle in the UK. On the specific issue that we met and discussed with him and other honourable colleagues, we are still looking at that issue, but we are taking it very seriously.
Rebecca Powell.
Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the Secretary of State coming to give us this announcement today, but also very much welcome the fact that international students will still be allowed to come here to study, but there's no dedicated route for unskilled labour and those earning below 30,000. So how will the department support employees in Taunton Deane, particularly in agriculture, tourism and the care industry, to get the labour that they need under this new system?
Home Secretary.
There are a couple of things I will tell my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker. And, first of all, in terms of students, indeed we want to try and increase more students, trying to get more international students choosing the UK, and there are measures here today to do that, and I know that the Department of Education takes that very seriously as well. And in terms of the need for workers with different skills, and especially skills that might not be classed as high skill under this paper, there's the short-term workers route, which I think will make a big difference.
Kate Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At a quick glance, I can only find 2 paragraphs in Chapter 6 on self-employment, and the Home Secretary will know how important that is, particularly, for example, in the construction sector, to fill gaps in vital roles such as bricklayers, electricians and carpenters. Can he say whether it will be possible for the industry or industry bodies to have some sort of umbrella sponsorship scheme to ensure that we can continue to recruit workers to those roles in order to meet the government's own growth and house building expansion plans?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's an important point the Honourable Lady raises, because as she'll know, and I think that's why she's rightly raised it, is that currently many of the construction workers for house building, for example, come under freedom of movement rules, and once that changes, we've got to find a way to still allow such workers to come and meet the needs of the economy. And what we have set out, she asked specifically about sort of umbrella sponsorship schemes, and that is in the White Paper.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome the statement from the Home Secretary and the opportunity to set our own immigration policy that, for the first time in a generation, that will ensure that it is fair, compassionate and meets the needs of our economy. However, the needs of our economy will change over time and also from region to region. So can the Home Secretary assure the House that built into our new immigration policy will be flexibility to be able to respond to the needs of our economy, and also that it will meet the needs of the economy across the whole of the UK, that it won't just be focused around the South East, but will meet the needs of places like Cornwall?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that assurance, and he quite rightly makes the point around needs that will change over time, and this is an immigration system that we built for the future. It will have those flexibilities to meet the needs of our economy, of our society. And if I give him one example in terms of the short-term workers scheme, when we looked at that, we were looking at many needs of the economy, but including a place if we look at Cornwall, the needs of the hospitality industry, for example, the seasonal nature of much of that demand as well. So I can happily give him that assurance.
Alison Toulis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have about the highest immigration caseload in Scotland, and what I see from the Home Office is cruelty time and time again. Families being separated, people who've lost babies not allowed their relatives to come and visit, a man who's working 2 jobs as a mortgage advisor and a shelf stacker in Asda just to meet the minimum income threshold so his family can come and see him. And I've seen cruelty to people who are qualified in the care industry not allowed to work by this Home Office and this government. All that's going to happen, is it not the case? All that will happen under this policy is that EU nationals will be treated just as despicably and just as cruelly as those who are not EU nationals at the moment.
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not recognise the picture that's painted by the Honourable Lady, and the answer is no.
Nigel Mills.
I welcome the statement. And ask the Secretary of State, could he just explain how his electronic travel authorisation scheme will work with the common travel area, and especially where a visitor arrives in Dublin and then travels on to the UK from there? Will they need to get one in that situation?
Home Secretary.
First of all, in terms of the common travel area, so it will not apply, just to be clear, to Irish citizens and British citizens moving between the common travel area. My honourable friend will know that the EU are also planning to introduce a similar scheme. I think they're calling it the ETIAS scheme. And as we develop this, we are looking at ways of working together.
Karen Buck.
Can the Secretary of State confirm that a chapter is closing during which millions of Britons have over the years been able to live freely across Europe, to work, start businesses and begin relationships in the same way that European citizens have been able to come to this country? And I speak as someone with the constituency with one of the highest proportion of EU citizens. Can he tell us that as the British government will want to negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement with Europe, our largest and closest trading partner, that there will need to be further concessions around the issue of migration, or is he establishing in this paper a set of red lines that will also determine our trade policy?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, what we have set out in the White Paper is flexibility for the UK in terms of mobility to strike trade deals around the world. With many countries, including the EU, that there is often a need to look at mobility arrangements, especially for service industries. And what we have set out here is, first of all, it's perfectly compatible with the future political framework document that's been set out by the government, but also as we look to do trade deals further afield with other countries, this document provides the flexibility that we need.
Matt Warman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Largely unskilled agricultural migration has seen Boston's population change by about a third in the last 10 years, but we haven't been able to attract the doctors and professionals that we need to cope with increased demand, and the consequences for community cohesion have been genuinely tragic, and it led directly to the highest vote to leave the European Union in the referendum. So can I say to the Home Secretary that when we get immigration policy wrong, it is a disaster for communities and for individuals. So this new policy is long overdue, but I would ask him please to take the year that he has built in to make sure that we get it right, because that is the only way we will undo some of the damage that has been done by previous government policies of all colours.
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a very important point from my honourable friend that really highlights that when we look at immigration going forward, it's not just about economic need, but it's also the pace of immigration, the volume of immigration, and he's given an excellent example of a community that has seen a very sudden change, so really quite a dramatic change in a short period of time, and how the local, how there's been an impact on local infrastructure, local public services, for example. So it is very important to get this balance right.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many black country foundries, which are crucial to the supply chain for both civil aviation and motor industry, are sustained by EU recruits because they have an ageing workforce and can't recruit locally. What conversations has he had with the industry on the impact of the short-term visa requirements on the availability of the EU migrants going forward and the potential impact on their businesses?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll make 2 points in relation to that. I mean, first of all, for all those EU citizens that are already here working in those foundries and elsewhere, they're all able to stay. We want them to stay, and so there should be no change in the current EU workforce. But going forward, there's both the high-skilled scheme and the short-term workers scheme that's in the White Paper. We have already had engagement with business groups, but what I've set out today is that I think that in terms of finalising that, especially some of the issues around thresholds, periods, cooling off periods, that will be done with much more engagement with business across the country in every region.
David Dukin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this government's commitment of giving priority to those workers with the skills that we need. I also welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today of a year-long programme of engagement across the UK. Could I therefore extend an invitation to my right honourable friend, or indeed my honourable friend the Immigration Minister, to come visit my constituency of Bath and Buchan, an area of very low unemployment, and talk to businesses, see for themselves those specific skills that are much needed in the fisheries sector, both in the catching offshore and the seafood processing onshore. Skills which can be sourced, of course, not just from the EU, but from across the world, including Africa and East Asia?
Well, first of all, I'm sure that we would both like to visit, not necessarily at the same time, but we're happy to receive his invitation. But he raises the important point that I think is important for many parts of the UK, but in particular in Scotland. I know this is an issue. I know that he and many other colleagues from Scotland have made this same point, and I think it is important to look at that. I do think the system that we've set out today has the flexibility to meet those needs, but I'm very happy to discuss those with my honourable friend further.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Immigration, whether from Europe or from right across the world, has made an enormously positive difference to my community and to our country, making us rich in every way imaginable. But given that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are evident proof that being highly paid and highly skilled are not the same thing, why does the government persist with this nonsense of a £30,000 cap to define what is constituting high skills? There are plenty of people in this country paid far less than the Home Secretary and far less than £30,000, and it would be an absolute tragedy to pull the drawbridge up to those people, denying not just them opportunity, but our country the skills and prosperity that we need too.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear the honourable gentleman is lobbying for a pay rise for all the members of the Cabinet, and I'll leave that to him. But it's not something the Cabinet are asking for. When it comes to the threshold for the highly skilled visa route that's in the white paper, it's important that it's based on evidence and that it works for each part of the country. And what the MAC have set out from their research, and it is worth emphasising, it is independent research that they have done, they suggest that it should be a £30,000 threshold. But what is required, I think, is further work and extensive engagement with businesses, with devolved authorities, with members of Parliament and others to determine what that should actually be.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think that my friend from Ilford actually wanted a pay cut for members of the Cabinet. And on that, it feels strange, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thought the Home Secretary was a free marketeer, but what he's given us here is a bureaucrat's charter to increase paperwork and red tape around business. And on page 47 of the white paper, it specifically says, the MAC has recommended lowering the skills threshold for new skilled workers whilst maintaining the minimum salary threshold, as has been said, of 30,000. So it's absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is not a skills-based immigration policy, this is a money-based immigration policy. And will the Home Secretary therefore answer how on earth he thinks our country plans to deal with its demographic challenge?
Well said.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid I don't agree with the assertions the honourable lady has made. I mean, she's suggesting that somehow this is going to lead to more bureaucracy, more red tape. In fact, it does. In fact, what we have set out by, for example, with high-skilled workers having no cap, no resident labour market test for high-skilled workers, more use of e-gates, for example, all these are examples where there will be less bureaucracy and less red tape.
Pete Wishart.
It's just a ferocious blueprint for Drawbridge Britain, a grotesque plan simply to keep people out of this country. But will the Secretary of State take this opportunity to be absolutely straight with the British people today that their freedom of movement will come to an end? What we do to the EU, they will do to us. And all the rights, unrestricted rights that we've had in this House to live, to work, to love across a community of 27 nations will be lost to our young people forever. And isn't that an absolute tragedy and shame?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that means the end of freedom of movement.
Owen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary rightly said in his statement that this country has a proud history of being an open and welcoming country, but it must sadden him, as it saddens me, that that reputation is being consigned to history by his government, and this White Paper is one further policy that is going to damage that reputation. He also said in his statement that this policy is going to boost our economy. Well, that seems deeply implausible given that EU migrants made a net contribution to this country and a total contribution of almost £5 billion last year. So, but if it is true, he must have worked it out. So can he tell us exactly how much he thinks this is going to boost our economy by?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't accept that analysis of the White Paper at all. What this White Paper does is it ensures that we remain an open and welcoming country to talent and people for whatever reason they choose to come to the UK from across the world. And the proof of that, for example, is the removal of caps, easier for students to stay and work in the UK, making it easier for people from across the world to visit the UK. That's the example of an open and welcoming country.
Andy Slaughter.
More than 20% of my constituents are EU27 citizens, and more than 40% were born outside the UK. I value their contribution to the economic, social and cultural life of Hammersmith, of London, and of the UK. I'd like to hear the Secretary of State join me in saying that, because the hostile environment his and the coalition government have fostered has created alienation, fear and distrust for very many migrants.
Madam Deputy, I'm very happy to join the honourable gentleman in welcoming and commending all the EU citizens that are both in his constituency, my constituency, and throughout the United Kingdom. I have said a number of times that, and it's self-evident, they've made a huge contribution to our country, to the success of our country, not just economically, but in our society more widely, our communities. They, in many cases, are members of our family, and that is why I would like them all to stay.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The proposed salary threshold is £30,000. Average annual pay in Wales is £27,000, compared with £37,000 in London. Wales will be left with a skills crisis impossible to remedy unaided. Can he assure Welsh businesses and communities and confirm now that Wales deserves a specific shortage occupation list and say when it will come into effect?
Good question.
The Honourable Lady, Madam Speaker, is right to raise the issue of regional differences, and the system will take account of that in various ways. So one example specific to Wales is a commitment in the White Paper to look at a shortage occupation list for Wales.
Paul Blomfield.
Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary owes my honourable friend, the member for Bristol West, an apology for the way in which he brushed aside her question. He made no reference to refugees in his statement, and having now had the opportunity to scan that section of the White Paper, it is peppered with words like maintain, continue, no change. Yes. So if my honourable friend was wrong, will he spell out exactly how this White Paper proposes to improve the way that we receive and treat refugees?
Thank you, Paul.
The White Paper is a result of the referendum result, which means no to freedom of movement, which reads, Madam Deputy, if the honourable gentleman give me a chance, I will actually answer his question. The White Paper is because the vote to leave means that we will have a new immigration system, and the work that was commissioned by the government from the Migration Advisory Committee was to look at what that system should look like by removing freedom of movement and how we would get the skills that we need. So it's very focused on skills. It is not focused on the issue of refugees and any changes, and nor do we have to wait for in terms of any changes that may or may not be made in terms of refugees. So, for example, there have been a number of changes in recent months and in recent years, whether it's unaccompanied children or in other cases with, for example, Syrian white helmets, and those kind of decisions don't have to wait for a new immigration system. We're perfectly capable of making the decisions now under the current system.
Gavin Robinson.
And Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Home Secretary for listening to the representations that I made on behalf of our party as Home Affairs spokesperson, that our party leader made, and that our parliamentary party leader made in respect of the income threshold. And just as Wales is £27,000, Northern Ireland is £24,500. The MAC report were wrong to suggest that there should be a one-size-fits-all income threshold.
In going to consultation, it sounds as if the Home Secretary agrees with that. But will he give serious consideration during that consultation and the outcome of that process to regional variations that reflect our regional difference?
It is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the Honourable Gentleman highlights this, is to look at regional differences. One way of trying to accommodate for those is through, for example, which is one way, is through the shortage occupation list, and we have committed here today that Northern Ireland will have its own shortage occupation list. I'm also conscious, and we've referenced that in the White Paper as well, that Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that has a land border with the EU, which I think causes other issues that need to be looked at as well, and we will certainly take that into account too.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Page 8 of the White Paper retains the notion that there should be targets in our immigration system, objective numbers of people to come, rather than recognising the need to look at skills. Can I encourage the Home Secretary to resist continuing this pointless exercise of targets and instead look at issues like, for example, with our public services and our NHS, where we have a nursing shortage of 100,000. The nursing starting salary is 23,000. And when the government cancelled the nursing bursaries, the numbers of people training to be nurses in this country has dropped by 13%. So when he looks at immigration, he looks at the salary level, can he look at it in the round in our economy and our public services and not take lessons from his benches about cutting our international aid agency, but instead recognise that a country that is spending £1.4 billion on agency fees for nurses within the NHS really needs to rethink how it treats the people who treat us best.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I always listen carefully to what honourable members have to say, what businesses, hospitals and others have to say. And an example of that, when the honourable lady mentions nurses and doctors for that matter, was the change that we made earlier this year to the current Tier 2 scheme to take doctors and nurses out of the cap altogether, which I know was a decision that was welcomed by the sector. But also, the honourable lady may know that nurses are currently on the shortage occupation list, which again shows just how seriously the government takes this issue.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Altmore, asked the Prime Minister directly at Prime Minister's questions if she still stood behind the ludicrous policy of cutting net migration to tens of thousands. So can the Home Secretary tell the House, if this white paper, and admittedly it is a white paper, but if it's implemented in full, in legislation, what conclusion have the Home Office come to as to the level of net migration as a result?
Yeah, good question.
In terms of levels of net migration, the commitment of this white paper and the system it represents is to bring it down to more sustainable levels.
Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Average earnings in Wales are in fact less than £26,500 a year. And so does the Home Secretary recognise the damage that his policy will do to the Welsh economy? And please don't tell me about a shortage occupation list, because that list will extend from one end of this chamber to the other.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that this system will work for all parts of the UK. I don't recognise that it will do damage to the Welsh economy. I think that is the wrong conclusions to draw from the system. I had a discussion this morning with the First Minister of Wales and went through in a bit more detail the paper, but obviously he needs to look at it a lot more carefully. I'm very happy to sit down with the First Minister, honourable members of this House that represent Wales, and discuss it further.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, could the Home Secretary confirm that in preparing this white paper, that careful cognizance was given to the needs of every part of the United Kingdom? And that being so, can he explain specifically in relation to rural west of Scotland, a fragile, low-wage economy and an area which desperately needs more people, exactly what part they played in shaping his thinking?
Well, first of all, the important point the honourable gentleman makes is around making sure that this works for all parts of the UK, and that's why in preparing this, my honourable friend the Immigration Minister held, for example, roundtables with business and other forms of engagement in every part of the UK, including Scotland. I've particularly had extensive engagement with honourable members that represent Scotland on the government benches who have taken a deep interest in this. And together, and I'm happy to listen to the honourable gentleman and others, but together I think we can make sure that as we finalise plans that are set out in the White Paper, that they work for all parts of the UK.
Hardy.
Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the Home Secretary is fully aware of the recruitment crisis that there is in our schools and the huge numbers of shortages throughout many of our schools as well. And I'm sure he'll also be fully aware that the starting salary for teachers is only £23,000. So will the Home Secretary look at lowering the £30,000 threshold to ensure that our children have the expert teachers that they desperately need?
Madam Deputy Speaker, what I'd say to the Honourable Lady, I mean, first of all, I think through the paper it's clear that we have committed to make sure when the threshold is set, it is one that we believe is right for the needs of the country and all parts, whether it's our schools and otherwise. But I would also just say this, it is also important that that we make sure we have an immigration system that also incentivises domestic employers to invest in the skills of local people, and that and immigration should never be thought of as a substitute to investment in local people.
Gavin Newlands.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary's boss, the Prime Minister, talks proudly of ending free movement once and for all, in complete denial of the fact that it's been one of the biggest sources of opportunity for UK citizens for the last quarter of a century. Be no doubt this white paper is not being taken forward in Scotland's name. We've asked time and time again for immigration powers to be devolved. This statement highlights exactly why we've asked. Will they rethink and devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Parliament? We voted to remain. We want no piece of this whatsoever. Yeah.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, and we have a single immigration policy for the entire United Kingdom.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency, the majority of my casework is all about immigration. There are so many different levels and different types of delays that people are experiencing, and I am not convinced that through this white paper we'll be able to deal with the level of bureaucracy of managing the immigration that will come through this. I'm also very much concerned about the one-year visas that will be given, as well as the 5-year visas, because this will then affect the workforce that is here, and it will affect people's livelihoods in terms of their security and investing in the UK.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the issue around bureaucracy and red tape, what we have tried to develop here is an immigration system that takes advantage of the very latest technology. It's much more digital. We have taken a much closer look, for example, of how other countries that have long had a completely independent immigration system, how they have done that. And we've also made a commitment, for example, to reduce the overall net burden on all businesses taken together. And I think by having this approach, we will actually end up reducing red tape, not increasing it.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like many members in this House, the majority of my casework is taken up with immigration matters, and I was quite alarmed that the Secretary of State did not mention anything regarding the appalling practice of indefinite immigration detention in his statement today. This is a shameful stain on our country's reputation. It's the only country in Europe, the UK, that does this without limit. And it's absolutely appalling, and it should be ended immediately without any sort of reservation. Yeah. We need to stop this now. My own constituent, Luke Newen, was detained despite being a trafficking victim and was moved arbitrarily around the UK to avoid proper legal representation and legal aid. It is not right, it is shameful, and it is an affront to every sense of justice and mercy in this country. Will the Secretary of State for the Home Department commit to ending the arbitrary, indefinite immigration detention system in this country immediately?
Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should always be looking to make sure we are doing everything we can to improve how we approach detention in this country. We don't have a policy of indefinite detention. No one No one can be detained unless there's a reasonable prospect of removal in a reasonable time. Over some 90% of people that are detained are removed within, or released or removed either way within 4 months. But one of the reasons we have commissioned 2 independent reports now on the detention system is to look at ways we can make improvements. So, for example, one of the recent things that I've started is to do a pilot scheme to look at alternatives to detention for people that otherwise would have been kept at Yarlswood.
Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we all know that the 30k salary cap fudge is just a political cop-out, and the message from the science and research sector around Cambridge could not be clearer. Please do not use salary levels as a proxy for skills. And the University of Cambridge has warned that extending the non-EEA system would significantly harm the UK's competitiveness. Now, I realise that the Home Secretary is constrained by the intransigence in the Downing Street bunker, but could he, at least as Home Secretary, recognise just how important this is for the science and research sector?
Yeah, well said.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the reasons why Britain is outstanding at science and research is because we do welcome talent from across the world, and that will not change with this new immigration system. And so when it comes to talent and employment, for example, in our universities, I used the example earlier of lab technicians, because this is one that the MAC itself used in its own report, that it is important to recognise that salary doesn't always determine skill level, and that will be taken into account in the new system. And then also when it comes to students, when they come to study at our great universities, many of them studying the sciences and other engineering and other subjects that we actually have a bit of a shortage of in this country. We should be making it easier for them to stay and work in the UK if that's what they choose to do, and this white paper does just that.
Carol Monaghan.
Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to first of all say that immigration has been fabulous for Scotland. But the Home Secretary has said repeatedly that this white paper is skills-based. So I would ask him if he could give us a definition of what is a high-skilled, medium-skilled and low-skilled occupation, possibly with an example to illustrate each.
Well done. Great question. Well done. Well, what we have done, Madam Deputy Speaker, is when we look at skills, is to be led by the evidence and an objective analysis. The MAC has set that out. So in terms of skill levels, it's been defined looking at the RQF levels of skill, which are well defined already. They have also suggested, rightly, that you take other factors into account, and we've had discussion today in the House around salary thresholds and how we will look at that further. And then also there's a multi-skilled route, so it's not linked to any qualification, it's not linked to any salary, and that's the short-term worker scheme.
Ruth Cadbury.
Deputy Speaker. People from non-EU countries and their families, such as many of my constituents, have borne the brunt of the Home Office's hostile environment. Hence, they were very receptive to the targeted message to them by the Leave campaign in the referendum that said that if we left the EU, the UK would free up non-EU immigration. And naturally, many local people bought that message. So was there any truth in that message? Or will there be just as many unreasonable refusals for EU citizens in the future as there have been up to now by non-EU citizens?
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I first just gently remind the Honourable Lady that the term hostile environment in the Home Office was coined by Labour ministers. It was a Labour government policy to the extent that it was ever a policy. And I'd be interested to see what the Honourable Lady had to say about the policy at that time. She's asked me specifically about non-EU migration. What this white paper does with the new system, I think it achieves a much fairer view of that, a much better balance in levelling the playing field by looking at people's skills and what they have to offer this country rather than their nationality.
Thank you. I hope this point of order relates directly to the statement from the Home Secretary, because otherwise it should come after the statement on Yemen.
It's directed to exchanges very much earlier in the chamber, and it's a matter of extreme urgency.
I would take those after. It's been quite clear what is the course of action that's being taken. So if the Honourable Lady would like to make a point of order after the next statement. Thank you. We now come to the statement from the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Secretary of State Jeremy Hunt.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission I'll make a statement on the quest for a political settlement to the war in Yemen. Last week the Houthi rebels and the government of Yemen held their first direct peace talks since 2016. Negotiations in Stockholm reached agreement on a ceasefire in the port city of Hodeidah and a mutual redeployment of forces monitored by the United Nations. As we look forward to Christmas, the people of Yemen are enduring one of the gravest humanitarian crises in the world. Hunger and disease are ravaging large areas of the country. 420,000 children have been treated for malnutrition. As many as 85,000 have starved to death. Today, 24 million Yemenis, more than 85% of the population, need help. Behind these stark, impersonal numbers lie real people, individual men, women and children, with hopes and aspirations no different from our own. And their ordeal is not the result of natural disaster or misfortune. This is a man-made calamity imposed by a war that has torn the country apart and reduced its people to appalling poverty. Hence the imperative need to resolve this conflict as rapidly as possible. From the beginning, Britain has made every effort to promote a political solution. Last month I travelled to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who lead the coalition fighting to restore Yemen's legitimate government. I later visited Iran, which supports the Houthi rebels. In every capital, I urged my counterparts to use all their influence to help bring their parties to the negotiating table. After my visit to the region, agreement was reached for 50 wounded Houthis to be evacuated from Yemen to Oman, a confidence-building measure intended to pave the way for peace talks. On the 19th of November, I instructed our mission at the United Nations to circulate a draft resolution to the Security Council, reinforcing the need for a political settlement and demanding the unhindered flow of food and medicine throughout Yemen. On 6th of December, the peace talks began in Stockholm, mediated by Martin Griffiths, the UN Special Envoy. Last Wednesday, I went to Stockholm myself, and the following day I met the leaders of both delegations. I was the first British minister to meet representatives of the Houthis. I urged the parties to seize the opportunity to reach agreements that would ease the suffering of the Yemeni people and move closer to the goal of ending the war. Last Thursday, the talks concluded with an agreement for the parties to meet again in January and to build trust by releasing thousands of prisoners. Honourable members will note the importance of the agreement on a ceasefire and redeployment in Hodeidah, because this port is a lifeline for Yemen and the channel for at least 70% of the country's food imports. The ceasefire in Hodeidah port and city came into effect at midnight yesterday, and the UN Special Envoy has reported that it seems to be working. If the ceasefire continues to hold and the UN succeeds in increasing the volume of traffic through the port, this should reduce the level of suffering. I've urged all parties to stick to the terms agreed last week in Stockholm so that we can find a lasting political solution to this devastating conflict. After the talks, I spoke about the next steps to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Earlier, I discussed the situation with Secretary Pompeo of the United States. Based on these consultations and the success of the peace talks, I have instructed our mission in New York to resume working on a draft resolution with the Security Council partners, with a view to adopting it later this week. We will ask the Security Council to vote on the draft within the next 48 hours. The UK text aims to build on the momentum generated in Stockholm by endorsing the agreements reached between the parties, authorising the UN to monitor their implementation, and setting out urgent steps to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. Our aim is to mobilise the collective weight of the UN behind the progress that's been made. I'm grateful to Martin Griffiths for his dogged efforts, which are nothing short of heroic. I also acknowledge the seriousness of purpose of the delegations from both sides who I met in Stockholm last week, and offer my thanks to the British diplomats both in the region and at the Foreign Office in London, who've worked assiduously behind the scenes to bring the parties together. Britain has been able to play this role because of our network of friendships, including our partnership with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and because we are a country that will always step up to its responsibilities. Whilst the House can draw encouragement from recent events, I don't wish to give false hope. The positive steps that we have seen could easily be reversed. The ceasefire is highly fragile. Many complex and difficult problems have yet to be addressed, let alone resolved. The people of Yemen still carry an immense burden of suffering. And although we have had some light at the end of the tunnel, we should be in no doubt that Yemen is still very much in the tunnel. So for as long as necessary, this country will continue to use all the diplomatic and humanitarian tools at our command to help settle this terrible conflict, and our values demand no less. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Foreign Secretary not just for advance sight of his statement, but for the attention he has devoted to the Yemen cause since coming to office. Many of us have spent countless hours in this House over the last 3 years debating how to end this dreadful conflict and the appalling suffering of the Yemeni people. And I think we all appreciate the time, effort and focus that the Foreign Secretary has brought to addressing this conflict over the past 5 months, alongside the Minister of State for the Middle East, and we thank them for that. And I also join him in paying tribute to Martin Griffith, but also, of course, to Mark Lowcock as well, for the excellent work that they have done in incredibly difficult circumstances in trying to forge a path to peace and a path to the end of this humanitarian crisis. They are both living proof of the old truth that our British diplomats do their job, not just because it is a career, but because it is a vocation, and we owe them a great debt for that service. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the past 3 years there have been precious few moments of hope in relation to Yemen, and indeed this is a moment of hope, and one that we must seize. So I want to use the time that I have today to ask the Foreign Secretary about next steps in this process. First, I greatly welcome his confirmation that a resolution is to be tabled this week at the UN Security Council to underpin this ceasefire and ensure that all necessary steps are taken to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. So based on his talks, can the Foreign Secretary give us his assessment of whether the United States stands ready to support the resolution this time round? And can he also address the crucial issue of what mechanisms there will be to monitor compliance by all sides with the terms of the resolution, and what penalties or sanctions are proposed for any breach of those terms? Second, I think that we all warmly welcome the appointment of General Commonwealth to oversee logistics and security of the operation in Hadejia. Someone of his experience and toughness is ideally suited, we all recognise, for this incredibly difficult task. But can the Foreign Secretary give us more details on how the security operation on the ground will be staffed, and what the thinking is behind the decision that it should not be an armed Blue Helmets operation, and whether the decision will be kept under review should General Commonwealth decide that it is required once he is on the ground? Thirdly, we have previously spoken about the fact that the ceasefire agreement will only apply initially to Hadejia. And we all understand that that is the most urgent priority in terms of tackling the humanitarian crisis. But can the Foreign Secretary tell us what proposed next steps there are in terms of brokering a wider ceasefire in other areas of conflict, including Taiz? And indeed in terms of brokering a wider political settlement for the whole of the country, including southern Yemen? Fourth, Madam Deputy Speaker, and again this is an issue we've discussed previously, but I'm sure that we all believe is an important principle. In Yemen, as in Syria, while the immediate priority is to foster the hope of peace and get humanitarian aid to those in desperate need, we must also ensure that there is proper accountability for all alleged breaches of international humanitarian law committed by both sides in this conflict, and that can only happen when we have a comprehensive, independent, UN-led investigation into all of those alleged crimes. So can the Foreign Secretary tell us whether such an investigation is proposed in the UN resolution to be tabled this week, and if not, what the proposed next steps are on that front? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is another important principle that it would be easy to sweep under the carpet at this time, when we are keen to keep Saudi Arabia on board with the ceasefire and get their support for the proposed UN resolution. However, I hope the Foreign Secretary will agree that it would be manifestly wrong if Saudi Arabia were able to trade its compliance with ending the conflict in Yemen for the world turning a blind eye to the question of who was responsible for ordering the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Tomorrow it will be 80 days since he was murdered. In Washington, the CIA have given evidence to senators, which led those senators to conclude overwhelmingly that Crown Prince bin Salman ordered the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. And yet in this Parliament, we are still waiting for any official conclusion from the Foreign Office or from the security services on who was responsible. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary to make clear today that the issues of peace in Yemen and accountability for the murder of Mr. Khashoggi are entirely separate, and will he tell us when he will present his conclusions on the latter?
Very good.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, can I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the constructive tone of her comments, and also thank her for crediting Mark Lowcock and his team at UN OCHA for the very important role that they are playing at the moment. And indeed, it's important to say that the draft text of the Security Council resolution that the UK is putting together puts as much emphasis on the humanitarian aspects to this terrible conflict as it does on the peace talks in Stockholm, and that is very much because of Mark Lowcock's very specific and important requests. So just to go through the points that she raised in order. First of all, I am confident that we have US cooperation in the process of laying this Security Council resolution. We have had extensive discussions with them, as well as with all the other sides in this terrible war. But I am speaking to Secretary Pompeo later this afternoon, and this will be one of the things that we discuss in detail. She talked about the mechanism to monitor compliance, and she's absolutely right that General Comert and his team of monitors are going to be essential to this. They are due to arrive in Hodeidah on Saturday, and their monitoring of what is going on is only made possible by having a UN Security Council resolution, which is why people have come together to make the passing of this resolution possible. And the draft resolution will require weekly report backs by the Secretary-General to the Security Council based on General Comert's evidence as to whether we have compliance with what was agreed in Stockholm. So she is right, that is extremely important. She's also right to say that it's not just Hodeidah. In fact, the draft statement talks about the other ports, Salif and Ras Issa, that are extremely important. But of course, what we actually need is peace in the whole country. Hodeidah is strategically the most important place to start with, because if we can open up the road between Hodeidah and the capital Sana'a, then you can start to get humanitarian supplies in. And the Stockholm talks gave a 3-week period starting from midnight last night, by when that road and the port and the city of Hodeidah have to be cleared of all combatants. And so this is what we are all holding our breath for. But in terms of accountability, I've actually got the draft wording on the resolution here, and first of all, it underlines the obligation on all parties to act in accordance at all times with principles of international humanitarian law. It also underlines the need for transparent, credible and timely investigations into alleged violations of international humanitarian law, and for those found responsible to be held to account. And then she raised the issue of Khashoggi, and she is absolutely right. These are separate issues and they cannot be linked, and I do give her that reassurance. As far as the UK government is concerned, the issue of Khashoggi is not closed. We don't think that all the facts have been established and we haven't seen proper conclusions from the Turkish investigation as to what actually happened. And as soon as we have those conclusions, we will share them with the House.
Andrew Mitchell.
It's a real relief, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the terrible catastrophe that is the Yemen today, to strongly support the actions taken by the Foreign Secretary in going to Stockholm, Tehran and Riyadh and trying to win the confidence of both sides. Can I also thank him for his absolutely accurate remarks about Sir Mark Lowcock, the head of UN OCHA, who was my permanent secretary, and the superb work that has been done by Martin Griffiths. There are, of course, today 10 million Yemenis on the brink of starvation this Christmas. Can I urge him to ensure that the new UN resolution is genuinely even-handed and condemns violence from all sides, whether Houthi missiles fired at Riyadh or Saudi bombing of built-up areas? And if the UN resolution is not even-handed, there is a grave danger that it will prejudice the next round of negotiations in January.
Well, can I thank him for his long-standing interest in what's been happening in Yemen. He's one of the few members of this House that's actually met the Houthi leadership and has enormous experience. And I want to thank him for continuing to raise this issue even when it wasn't high up everyone else's agenda. He is absolutely right about the importance of this UN resolution being balanced. It does indeed refer to the issue of Iranian missiles being fired into Saudi Arabia from Yemen. But the way that I think we will be able to unite all sides behind this resolution is to focus on what was agreed at Stockholm and also the humanitarian needs of the people of Yemen, and not, if I can put it this way, go into too much detail about the causes of the conflict, which inevitably become more controversial. And what we're trying to do is, at this stage, build up the trust on both sides so that the fighting stops.
Stephen Gethins.
Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement? Can I also put on record our thanks to him for his ongoing work and also that of UK officials? I know this is a crucial few weeks coming up. I'd like to particularly put on record our thanks to Martin Griffiths and Mark Lowcock as well. I think it underscores the importance of multilateral agencies like the United Nations. There's a recognition, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for his tone about the recognition, as he has done in previous statements, about the recognition of the acute humanitarian disaster that has unfolded and that we must seize the opportunity for peace. Can he tell the House what steps he's taken to ensure that aid reaches those who are most in need and who are worst affected? Because I think that's something that will be important in these coming weeks. Also, in terms of peace building, I know that he recognises this and his officials do as well, but it requires long-term investment, and we know that from conflicts elsewhere. We continue to be concerned that arms sales to combatants in this conflict far outstrip aid. I'm also concerned, I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we often hear from the Foreign Secretary, and I hope he'll take his criticism in the tone in which it's meant, that arms sales means influence. And actually, if you look at some of the key influencers elsewhere, they have stopped arms sales, Canada, Germany, and most recently Spain as well. Can he tell us, as we go into these crucial few weeks, why is the UK different? Will he reassess that approach to arms sales as the UK is increasingly isolated in this regard? Can I finally welcome the wording? The question of accountability is incredibly important. I think that wording is good progress. And I welcome his remarks about Khashoggi, but I'd like to get his reflections on the US Senate findings and his reassurances again that he'll make a full statement to the House when those findings are clear.
Well, let me take those issues. First of all, on the humanitarian side, my honourable friend, the Minister of State, met the ICRC yesterday to make sure that we're fully briefed. He will know that we are the second largest bilateral donor. I think £170 million from memory in the last year alone, given to help the conflict in Yemen. And so we treat that very seriously. But in terms of what specifically we're doing, the main issue is opening up the road between Hodeidah and the capital Sana'a, and so that's why a major focus of these talks has been to get that corridor opened, and that is very, very challenging, but we did succeed in that. We didn't succeed, which was a disappointment in these talks, in getting the airport in Sana'a opened, because we couldn't get agreement on which flights would be allowed to go from that airport. And that's something we hope to do. Just something I didn't mention in response to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, but is also relevant to the Honourable Gentleman's question. The next step is to try to get the parties back around the table for another round of peace talks at the end of January, and that will be to discuss the framework for a political settlement. So the idea is that this is the first step that builds up confidence between both sides and allows the fighting to stop, and then we can move towards the political settlement. In terms of the arms embargoes, we have a process that was actually set up by the last Labour government in 2000, which I think we have to follow. It's one of the strictest processes in the world, and it means that we independently look at whether there is a risk of a violation of international humanitarian law. But to reassure him, the draft wording of the statement that the UN Security Council resolution does emphasise the legally binding obligation on all member states to comply with the arms embargo imposed by Resolution 2216. And as I mentioned before, the obligation on all parties to act in all times in accordance with international humanitarian law.
Tom Tugendhat.
Deputy Speaker, may I pay tribute to the Foreign Office ministers assembled today for the amount of work they put in, not just the Secretary of State himself, the Minister for the Middle East, but also the Minister for the Americas, who has done an awful lot of diplomacy here with our allies. Also to the Honourable Member for Sutton Coldfield, whose attention to detail in the Yemen matter has been second to none. And may I also unusually also pay tribute to the spokesman for the opposition, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, on this, who has again conducted herself with absolute dignity and been extremely rigorous in her questioning and helpful in her argument. Because what we're dealing with here is a horrific humanitarian disaster that we have seen emerge over past years. Would I be right in saying that my right honourable friend has done an awful lot of work now in getting to the peace talks, but the next stage is what we're looking at? Yes, of course there is the monitoring, but then there's also the confidence building, and that will come by the delivery of aid, by the visible progress on the ground, and the actual success that comes to both parties from the achievement of peace. And could my right honourable friend perhaps say a little bit about that?
Yes, first thing is, in terms of visible confidence-building measures on the ground, one of the most important things is to get money into the Yemen economy and through the Central Bank of Yemen to strengthen its functioning and make sure that pensioners and civil servant salaries are paid. And that will bring spending power into the economy, and that is covered in the draft UN resolution. But in terms of the next steps, the basic issue that we have is that the Houthis, who are around 15% of the population, recognise that they can only have a junior part in a government of national unity, which has to be the next step. But they need to have confidence that they will be secure in being able to play that part. And so that's why building up confidence over the next 6 weeks is going to be important. They accept that principle. But they have to be confident that it would be delivered. And of course, given what's happened, there is a huge amount of mistrust.
Stephen Twigg.
I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and the progress that has been made with the Stockholm talks, and can I echo his praise for both Martin Griffiths and Mark Lowcock. On ceasefire monitoring, the Special Envoy explicitly requested a robust UN regime answerable to the UN Security Council. Can the Foreign Secretary assure the House that that is what is provided in the current text? And on confidence building, one of the issues that would really secure greater confidence would be agreement on the reopening of Sana'a Airport. Is that something that's being considered in the next stage?
Well, first of all, can I thank him and his committee for their sustained interest in Yemen and also for his personal commitment to making progress. The monitoring mechanism is UN authorised. It will be reporting back to the UN. It's led by a Dutch general, and the UN Secretary General is going to be requested to report back weekly. So absolutely yes to that question. With respect to the airport, this is something I raised with both delegations. We were hoping we could get agreement to reopen Sana'a Airport. There are essentially 2 international flights, I think to Egypt and Jordan, but the government of Yemen wanted to insist that the international flights went to Aden first, which they control and which the Houthis were reluctant to do. And so we, in the end, weren't able to reach agreement, but that is very much the next step.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I concentrate on the corridor that's going to be between Hodeidah and Sana'a, which is 140 miles long, through very rough country, and whichever peacekeeping or monitoring force that goes in has got to be of the highest quality, because that is one heck of a distance to monitor, speaking from my own experience. And then, beyond Sana'a, or indeed direct from the port, you've got to have corridors out to get aid, because this aid will not succeed unless the people that are hungry put it in their mouths. And that is the crucial thing that we've got to achieve.
Well, he is absolutely right, and his own experience of peacekeeping in Bosnia informs his questions, as the whole House will have seen. We do have that commitment from both sides to clear that road of combatants, but we won't succeed unless there is enough trust between both sides to actually sustain that. And this is one step at a time, and I agree with him. There is a long way ahead to make this happen. But what will happen, to reassure him, is that the UN will be monitoring very closely what happens, and anyone who breaks this agreement will face the full wrath of the UN and the members of the Security Council.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The fact that the Foreign Secretary has been able to report tentative progress after so much suffering and bloodshed to the House today is a reminder of the importance of seizing the moment and of courageous political leadership, and I join all the other members who have expressed their thanks to him, to Martin Griffiths, to Mark Lowcock, and lots of other people who worked very hard to bring this moment about. He said that Patrick Commerz and his team may arrive on Saturday. Is it his understanding that the redeployment committee that he is responsible for chairing will have representation from the 2 warring parties, that they will turn up, number one? And number two, on the peace process, it has been reported that the government of Yemen was unwilling to sign an outline peace plan in Stockholm because they thought it gave too much to the Houthis and not enough to them. Can he confirm whether that is the case, and what does he think now needs to happen in order to win their confidence so that a peace plan can indeed make progress?
Well, I also thank him for his long-standing interest in this issue. On the second of those 2 questions, I will find out precisely what I know on it. But I don't think it was the objective in Stockholm to secure the framework. I think that was always thought to be something that would happen in January at the second stage. And on the first one, if I may, I'll write to him with some details.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for Martin Griffiths, Foreign Office officials, and his own contribution to the Stockholm ceasefire agreement, which gives a chance for peace and humanitarian relief in Yemen, and is perhaps also a boost to multilateral negotiations in general. But does my right honourable friend agree that for a ceasefire to be permanent, both sides and their backers, despite mistrust, will have to agree that there's no real victory in any further military action, only more human misery?
Well, he is absolutely right. And as a former diplomat, he will know that what has bedevilled this conflict has been the belief on both sides, which I think persisted even when I started just 5 months ago as Foreign Secretary, that a military victory was possible. I think the people who've changed the most in this respect, to their credit, are the Saudis, who I think do now genuinely wish to find a political settlement and recognise the importance of that. And so we need to continue the pressure on both sides to make sure this is actually what happens.
Kevin Brennan.
Foreign Secretary said, and I'm sure with sincerity, behind these stark impersonal numbers lie real people. He'll know because I've raised it in correspondence, in meetings with ministers and on the floor of this House, the case of my constituent Jackie Salah's daughter, Safia, who was kidnapped from Cardiff in 1986, brought up in Yemen, has children who are also British citizens and wants to leave Yemen and travel back to the UK, but she needs to get a British passport. She can now, apparently, has the funds to travel to Cairo to apply for that. Can he please make sure that his officials, his ministers, work with the Home Office to give special attention to this case? These are British citizens, and they deserve special attention given the tragic history of this case.
Well, can I thank him for his championing of this very sad case. We know about the case extremely well, thanks to the representations that he's made. We are in contact with the Home Office about this. Up till now, our difficulty has been that we haven't had consular representation in Yemen. Obviously, that's something we hope will change, but we will do everything we can to support his constituent and their family in the way that he wants.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend in the progress he's made thus far. But clearly this is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So could he elaborate on what the attitude of both those countries is towards this fragile peace negotiation, and what further steps he can take to encourage them to promote peace rather than war?
Well, my honourable friend is right that this is, of course, the biggest geostrategic risk from the conflict in Yemen. But I think the sense I had when I went to both Riyadh and also to Tehran is that neither side wants to perpetuate it, and both sides would like to see it concluded. I think, if for no other reason than that the appalling humanitarian consequences of this conflict have become all too apparent, and I think they feel a sense of responsibility for what is happening to fellow Muslims, and they want to do something about it.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we are approaching Christmas, I understand that one of the three wise men in the Bible story was the King of Sheba, which is modern Yemen. Very much a peace story at Christmas is, and so it is very significant that we are talking about how we can bring peace to a country that's very disturbed. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his efforts, but I want to ask again, at which point will the government consider to suspend arms trades with Saudi Arabia? The question has been asked before, but I didn't think I really understood exactly what the government is doing.
Well, let me repeat then. We have one of the strictest arms control regimes in the world, and we have a process independently run that assesses the risk of a breach of international humanitarian law, and we follow that process.
Kevin Foster.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the dreadful news we've heard from Yemen over the last few years, it's been very welcome, the news of the ceasefire around Hodeidah that will allow humanitarian aid to flow through. But could the Foreign Secretary confirm what discussions he's had with his colleagues in the Department for International Development about what role Britain will play in ensuring there is long-term support to rebuild this country?
Well, I can absolutely confirm we have extensive discussions with my right honourable friend, the International Development Secretary, and indeed we raised the issue of Yemen yesterday at the National Security Council, and we're both in constant contact.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a huge relief that that the ceasefire has been employed, and I endorse all the words of thanks that have gone before. But can I ask, does he genuinely believe that Iran has changed its view, given that this regime has deliberately increased the suffering and starvation of the Yemeni people that it's purported to be supporting? And does he believe that
a peace deal which created an Iran-backed regime in Yemen could be catastrophic to the peace in the Middle East and must be ruled out at all costs.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, he is absolutely right. There will never be peace unless it guarantees Saudi Arabia, one of Yemen's neighbours, their territorial integrity, and they have had Iranian missiles fired into the capital of Saudi Arabia from Yemen, which is a huge concern to them. Do I genuinely believe the Iranians have changed? I think the answer is that we wouldn't have got the agreement we got in Stockholm without the support of both Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So I do think there has been a change, but I still think there's a long way to go.
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. All in the Chamber will welcome the peace talks recently held in Stockholm and the progress that was indeed made there. Is my right honourable friend confident that this will prove to be a stepping stone to a desperately needed permanent ceasefire in Yemen?
Well, my honourable friend is right to say that that is a holy grail. If we can get a proper, full, permanent ceasefire for the whole country, then everyone will heave a huge sigh of relief. We are taking small steps towards that with the ceasefire in Hodeidah, but the intention is that that builds trust between the parties that allows the full ceasefire that he rightly calls for.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the work that he has done so far. It's been very heartening to see the progress that has been made. Christine Beckel from Human Rights Watch has pointed to the significance of the prisoner exchange in the agreement, especially as this concerns political prisoners, activists, journalists, minority faiths such as Baha'i, refugees, men, boys and even women arbitrarily detained through the conflict. What assurances can he give and what support will he give to the International Committee of the Red Cross to ensure that this is closely monitored, to ensure that all arbitrarily or deliberately detained will see freedom and see it soon?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, she's right to draw attention to the issue of prisoner exchanges because it's pretty much the very first way that you can build trust between both sides. And so that's what's happened at Stockholm, the agreement to do that, and the UN resolution will be making sure that all the important parts of the Stockholm Agreement are properly independently monitored by the United Nations.
Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, the international condemnation of the Saudi regime is almost unanimous. Many prominent EU member states, most recently Germany and Spain, along with Canada and now the US this week, have all taken steps to either condemn the actions of the Saudi regime or suspend arms sales. If the UK wants to recover any semblance of moral leadership, should it not join the US Senate in condemning their illegal conduct and immediately suspend arms sales?
Foreign Secretary.
What I gently point out to the honourable gentleman is there is no point in setting up an independent process, which is one of the strictest in the world, if we then do not go on and follow it, and that is what we are doing.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, 18,000 children, some as young as 10, have been used as soldiers in this horrific war. They've been forced to torture, to kill, with the promise of money for their families, largely by the Houthi rebels. Officially, this has been denied, but the Associated Press has interviewed no less than 18 child soldiers who have been exploited. I asked the Foreign Secretary, when he met with the Houthis, did he raise this matter? And also, what discussions and assurances has he sought from the UN envoy to Yemen to seek that all children are protected as paramount and not as an afterthought?
Well, I can absolutely reassure her that the protection of children and indeed everyone vulnerable is on all of our minds, but it's certainly on the minds of the people who are trying to get the two sides together, because I think it is the escalating humanitarian crisis that's been a real engine for the talks. In terms of when you raise the issue of terrible behaviour with participants on all sides, there is a time and a place to do that, and at Stockholm we were trying to bring everyone together, and so whilst we are setting up accountability mechanisms, we also have to recognise that the primary objective now is to get the fighting to stop.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Mr. Speaker, the use of child soldiers and indeed deliberate targeting of civilians are just two examples of the types of atrocities we've seen in this terrible war. Now, whilst I very much appreciate the wording of the draft resolution on those responsible being held to account, can the Foreign Secretary just set out practically how he is going to try and ensure that investigation into these terrible human rights breaches is entirely independent?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we want them to be independent, and the word used in the UN resolution is credible. And I think unless you have a credible investigation into these atrocities, you will not get the closure on the issue, and there won't be justice and there won't be confidence.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the previous members who praised the work of our diplomats and ministers and those from other countries that made this welcome but limited step possible? The Foreign Secretary referred to the political framework which he hopes would be discussed in January. He also mentioned, but didn't go into detail, the idea of a government of national unity. Isn't it a fact that the complexities of Yemen mean that there are not just two sides? And is there any thought going into how to engage people in the south and other parts of Yemen in this process? Otherwise, a government of national unity will not work.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, he has a lot of experience of this from his time on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He's absolutely right. A government of national unity has to cover the whole country. It has to give confidence to the Houthis that, despite being a minority, their rights are going to be respected, but it has to give confidence to all minorities, so I agree with him.
Paul Sweeney.
Gratuitous war crimes perpetrated by both Saudi Arabia and Iran as the key regional proxies in this conflict. So given that situation and their failure to honestly and openly investigate those accusations, why will the Secretary of State not support an independent UN-backed inquiry into all allegations of war crimes perpetrated by all sides in the Yemen conflict? And why is it not included in the draft resolution at the United Nations?
Because the draft resolution has to be a resolution that has the consensus of both sides. I do support fully independent investigations into everything that has happened. I think that's right and it must happen. We have to go step by step, though, and at the moment, getting agreement to a ceasefire, the first ceasefire that we've had in the entire history of this terrible conflict, is a huge first step, and that we wouldn't want to compromise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I join others who have thanked the Foreign Secretary and his colleagues for his thoughtful and measured approach. And I would like to ask him if he or his fellow Minister, the Right Honourable Member for North East Bedfordshire, whose work I also commend, have had any discussions with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees about any possible consequences for numbers of refugees or internally displaced people, and how we will be responding if so.
My honourable friend, the Minister of State, says he spoke to Filippo Grandi a couple of weeks ago on that issue.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with others in commending the Foreign Secretary and his ministerial team for making this progress with regards to Yemen, albeit fragile progress? Can I also say to him that it's amazing what a Foreign Secretary can achieve in office, regardless of which political colour, when the office holder takes the job seriously. But can I ask him to give some comment to what initial reactions he's had from other Security Council members with regard to the draft resolution, what concerns, if any, have they raised, and how Martin Griffiths and his team, along with the Foreign Office team, are addressing this?
Secretary.
Well, as the honourable gentleman will know from his work on the Select Committee, there is a range of views on the Security Council, but broadly speaking, there is a combination of people who are naturally sympathetic to one side or the other, with people who think that the most important thing now is to move forward with humanitarian relief, and it's bringing those people together.
Graham P. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think every member of this House is absolutely delighted with this first steps in what is a peace process in Yemen to alleviate this tragic humanitarian crisis that's gone on for too long. Nothing sums up this crisis more than at the weekend where a brother and sister, she was aged 6, he was aged 4, shot by Houthi snipers for trying to just play out in the street. It's a terrible situation. Will he also raise the 1 million landmines that have been raised by the Houthis, which is a terrible legacy that will need clearing up in these peace talks? And finally, in his draft final motion to the UN, will it include free and fair elections as part of that motion?
Foreign Secretary.
Look, I think the point he makes about landmines is very, very important, and the UK has a lot of experience, a lot of fantastic NGOs who work in that area, and I'm sure we would want to make them available to service the people of Yemen. With respect to the draft political declaration, it doesn't talk about the future political framework, important though that is really a stage for the next set of talks, which we're hoping will happen in January.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to add my warm words about this agreement. It is a real positive step forward, and I'm pleased that the Foreign Secretary mentioned not only Hodeidah, but also Ras Issa, which of course is the fuel terminal, and without opening that terminal up, we will be unable to get the food across the rest of the country. However, at Foreign Office questions, the ministers told us that they could not tell the House whether UK manufactured weapons or planes were involved in the deaths of civilians and possible war crimes, seeing that the head of the independent office that he mentioned earlier on recommended in his professional judgment that arms sales should be suspended, and ministers overturned his judgment. Will he now look again at suspending arms sales?
Secretary.
I don't know where he gets that information from, but it is not correct.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and his team for the work that they've been doing on this very grave issue of the war in Yemen. It has been a war on children and the most vulnerable, and every 10 minutes a child dies in Yemen. My own local churches are absolutely desperate to do all that they can, and I know that Minister Burt will be visiting Diffid in my constituency tomorrow. So what more can we do as MPs, as communities, and in relation to our constituents to avert the humanitarian disaster that has so encompassed Yemen?
Well, I thank her for that question, and I think the answer is that we can all make sure our constituents know about the issues happening in Yemen, and we can all encourage people to support the charities and NGOs who are funding the humanitarian work that's happening there.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I also first of all just thank the Foreign Secretary for his sterling endeavours and leadership and constructive role in visits to the area over the last few months. It's been much appreciated. With reports that 67% of the Yemen population need urgent action to save lives and livelihoods, and that 20 million Yemenis are vulnerable to death and 250,000 are on the brink of starvation, could the Minister outline the type of aid that has actually gone from here to there in the last 3 months, and what plans there are to help with equipment and support to allow people to survive and to work safely?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We are supporting with our £170 million that we gave in the last year alone food, water, shelter and other vital relief for people in this desperate situation.
Thank you. Order. As I promised the House, I have looked at the television footage of the Leader of the Opposition reacting to the Prime Minister, allegedly saying "stupid woman" to those seated next to him. Having heard the allegation against the Leader of the Opposition, and having watched the footage, it is easy to see why the Leader of the Opposition's words might be construed as "stupid woman." That was also the opinion of lip speakers, and I emphasise lip speakers rather than lip readers, whose advice was sought and obtained at short notice. As may be known to members of the House, but it is important in terms of establishing the context, but may not be known to others watching or listening to our proceedings, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was seated at the time and not addressing the House. So whatever he said was not and is not audible on the House's audio-visual record. As I have told the House, I neither saw the incident nor heard anything. It was for the same reasons neither heard nor seen by the clerks or by my private secretary. Nor was there any immediate reaction in the House. I believe the allegation made by a number of honourable and right honourable members was based upon the visual evidence from Parliament TV. I also have to rely purely on visual evidence. I am not a lip reader, or indeed a lip speaker. Nobody can be 100% certain. That includes professional lip readers. But I will naturally take, and would be expected to take, the word of any right honourable or honourable member. It is reasonable to expect the House to do the same. I therefore invite the right honourable gentleman, who has at my request returned to the House for this purpose, to make his explanation to the House, which again I expect to be heard without interruption. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your invitation to come to make a short point to the House, which I'm very happy to do and have come immediately to do that. During Prime Minister's question time today, I referred to those who I believe were seeking to turn a debate about the national crisis facing our country into a pantomime as stupid people. Mr. Speaker, I did not use the words stupid woman about the Prime Minister or anyone else, and am completely opposed to the use of sexist or misogynist language in absolutely any form at all. And I'm happy to place that on the record at your request this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Point of order, the Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the country and this House will have drawn their own conclusions, and I deeply regret that the Right Honourable Gentleman has not seen fit to apologise to my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister.
Thank you. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for what she has said, which requires no comment from the Chair. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your guidance, how may I make this orderly? Read my lips. I do not believe him. What can we do to further verify this evidence? What can we do to further ask experts to review this evidence and get the apology from the Right Honourable Gentleman that my honourable friend the Prime Minister deserves?
It is not open to a member to impugn the integrity of another member. That is order, please. That is a violation of the established. If the honourable lady will permit me, she has raised her point of order perfectly reasonably, and I am responding to her. It is not in order to impute dishonour to another member. That is a very long-established convention of this House, so it is not orderly to accuse another member of dishonesty. When the honourable lady inquires what further may be done, the answer to the honourable lady is that people can seek to solicit opinions on this matter, including of a professional character. I have offered, at short notice, as I thought was my duty, the fruits of the professional advice that I have received. I've shared that very openly with the House. It is not for the Chair to pronounce judgment, guilty or innocent, upon a member. It is well established that a member is to be taken at his or her word. If the matter is to be further discussed, debated, commented upon, that is to be expected. but it isn't a matter of order for the chair now. That is as full, and I hope the honourable lady will agree, as courteous a response as I could possibly be expected to provide. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have heard the words "stupid woman" being used in this chamber about myself, and I'm afraid to say I've heard it from yourself in the Speaker's chair. So, Mr. Speaker, please can we have an apology, draw a line against this and move on?
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable lady for her point of order. I understood that she had made this observation outside the House. And what I want to say to the honourable lady, whom I always treat with great respect in this chamber, is the following. The honourable lady has at no time previously, that is to say prior to today, made that allegation against me. The honourable lady has not come to me and said that, and to my knowledge, I am in. If the honourable lady will do me the courtesy of allowing me to respond to her point of order, as she has raised it, to my knowledge, I'm not in receipt of a letter alleging that. If there is such an allegation, I refute it 100%. I have received a letter from the honourable lady, as she knows, within, I think, the last 24 hours, on an unrelated matter, specifically to do with proxy voting and baby leave, and I believe I'm right in saying, well, perhaps the honourable lady will do the courtesy of allowing me to respond. I believe I'm right in saying that she wrote to me upon that matter, at least in part in her capacity as chair of the all-party women group in this House. And to that letter she will, of course, receive a response. That contention has not previously been made, but if it is now made, I say with absolute certainty it is not correct. I have not said that to or about the honourable lady. That is my response to the honourable lady. Yes, indeed. Yes. Point of order, Laura Pidcock.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say it's nice to be back. I would just wonder what conclusion members of the public will draw from the chamber being used in this way. The right honourable gentleman has made his point. Constituency office today that members of my constituency and residents have had to have present parcels delivered to them because they cannot afford to buy their children presents. They have not got the money for food, and the chamber being used in this way is absolutely pathetic.
Well, the honourable lady has made her own point in her own way, and it's on the record, and I thank her for taking part in these proceedings, and I will come to other members, preferably to people who have not already raised points of order. Point of order, Helen Whately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think actually it is important what language is used in this chamber. And this centenary year, a large number of us on all sides of the House have made huge efforts to encourage more women to stand for Parliament, many of which have been successful. I believe women are coming forward. It is a great shame that we seem to be nearing the end of the year on such a sour note. Can I urge you, Mr. Speaker, to do more to make sure that the tone of this chamber is better next year, not just to draw a line under this, to make sure next year is better on these points?
I think, can I say to the honourable lady, I think that's an entirely reasonable point of order. I'm happy to do my bit, and everybody else should do their bit as well. I have the highest regard for the honourable lady, whose commitment on these issues is well known to me. I hope the honourable lady and others will take it in the right spirit if I say that throughout my 9.5 years in the chair to date, I have devoted myself to the cause of trying to open up this place. I have sought to do everything I can to promote a progressive approach in the chamber, in the calling of members, in the functions that I host in Speaker's House, in the approach to facilities on the estate, which didn't previously exist. That's all part of the record. It is manifest, it is observable, and it is incontrovertible. Can we all do better? We can. Should we? We should. Will we? I hope that we will. So I am agreeing with the honourable lady, and I'm sure that that will please her. Point of order, Mr. Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On live television this afternoon, I think everybody in the House would know of well-respected and much admired deaf musician Dame Evelyn Glennie, world-famous percussionist. She was shown by the presenter of that television programme the clip of the Leader of the Opposition and asked what he had said. And he said, "Stupid woman." Is there any way I can put on the record that with that tone of apology from the Right Honourable Gentleman, it would have been better if he hadn't bothered?
Well, I don't honestly think, and I say this in all courtesy to the Honourable Gentleman whom I've known for 3 decades, that he's really very interested in anything I have to say in response to him. What he wanted to do was to say, no, and I'm not even complaining. I'm not criticising the Honourable Gentleman, and I'm grateful for his good humour. The Honourable Gentleman wanted to make his own point, and he's made it. And I stand by what I previously said. The Honourable Gentleman's made an important point, but it isn't not a contradiction of what I've said about the impossibility of certainty, nor is it inconsistent with the spontaneous interpretation which I myself offered. But I repeat, it was my interpretation. I'm not a lip reader, I'm not a lip speaker, and it's not for me to cast judgment in this matter. And fair-minded people who are interested in the merits of the issue, and I'm sure that includes the Honourable Gentleman, will know that what I say is true. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I will come to other colleagues. Point of order, Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also agree that we have a responsibility as members of this House to be upholding the very highest standards in language about each other, but also about each other's integrity. And I do hope that we will be able to see a renewed commitment to that next year. Mr. Speaker, I also would like to say that I have been proud to sit on your committee for enhancing equality and diversity in this House from very soon after I was elected, and to put on record my thanks to you for your commitment to equality and diversity in this House in so many different manners. And my point of order, Mr. Speaker, is on a slightly different topic, however, because according to press reports of a leaked DWP document, EU exit planning, economic downturn, the government, as part of its long-term contingency planning in the event of no deal, suggested it would create a strategy with other departments handling the negative impacts, e.g. homelessness, poverty and suicide. Mr. Speaker, if this is true, these are extremely serious allegations and should be, or matters, and should be brought explicitly to this House so that we have access to government analysis as to who they expect to fall into poverty, where homelessness could rise, and who they see at risk of suicide.
For her initial remarks and for her subsequent point of order, to which my response is that there may be an opportunity for those concerns to be aired during the course of the afternoon. Point of order, Sir Desmond Swade.
Mr. Speaker, can I declare an interest as someone who has a bad habit of making utterances under my breath in this chamber? My point of order to you, sir, is had you received different advice from the lip speakers, giving uncontroversial controvertible evidence as to what the Leader of the Opposition have said, what would have been the result? Because I am deeply concerned about the fact that if members are to be upbraided for what they might say under their breath, we are in the realms of thought crime. And this is the madness that is sweeping the universities. What was said was not on the record.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. I think I've already pointed to the impossibility of certainty in these matters. I repeat, I think most people would accept the reasonableness of my point, and I note with interest and respect the point that the Right Honourable Gentleman, who's an extremely experienced and distinguished parliamentarian, has made. Point of order, Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I fully accept what you have said in the fact that you were not in the eye line of the Leader of the Opposition. Sitting where I was sitting, I was in the eye line of the Leader of the Opposition. I do have to accept what he has said at the dispatch box, because I don't think he would deliberately lie to the House. But other people will be able to draw their own conclusions from it.
Well, can I, off the top of my head, thank the right honourable gentleman for what he has said and for the understated terms in which he has said it. People can form their own judgment, but I appreciate the fact that the right honourable gentleman is not seeking to prolong the argument further, at any rate on the evidence of what he has just said, and that I think is respected. He's a very senior member of this House with long experience. And yes, indeed. Of course, I will come to the honourable lady. Point of order, Dr. Matthew Offord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, because you said you would go away and you would look at the evidence, you would look at the video, and you would make your mind up, and you did that, and I am very grateful. But it is for my constituents to make their own mind up when they actually look at that footage as well, and it is for them to decide if the honourable member or anyone else is indeed a misogynist or anti-Semitic, not for us.
Well, with great respect, and I heard the honourable gentleman out, and it was right to do so. He's made his own point, including a point that was not germane to these exchanges or this controversy, but it stands on the record. I have said I would look into it. I have looked into it. I've come back to the House and I've said what I've said, and the Leader of the Opposition has said what he's said, and I don't honestly think I can be expected to add to that, but I thank the honourable gentleman. A point of order. Yes, I will come to the honourable gentleman. Of course I will. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the comments made by my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, can I say to you, with greatest respect, Mr. Speaker, that there are occasions when people do leave this chamber feeling that they have been offended by yourself. And I think the fact that the honourable member felt that way, yet did not feel that there was an appropriate process in place in order to make that complaint or concern felt, probably suggests we've still got work to do in terms of raising issues and concerns in this place.
Always work to do, and progress is not a matter of an isolated act or a single initiative, but rather of a continuous process. I accept the significance of what the honourable gentleman says in that regard, which seems to me to be unexceptionable. Unexceptionable. Yes, point of order, Laura Smith.
As somebody who is still a relatively new member of this House, I wondered if you could advise me on how I explain to my constituents the level of party politics that is being played out. Don't let them shout you down. Don't let them shout
you down. Order. That observation at the beginning of that point of order has met with much criticism, but I would very gently say to members can't have it both ways. They can't on the one hand talk about respect, wanting respect for their own right to speak and their own opinion, but not accord a comparable level of respect to someone who happens to express a view that differs from their own. Point of order, Laura Smith.
Mr. Speaker, you hit on the end of my point, because the level of hypocrisy in this place is quite astounding. To pot up with the most disgraceful insults thrown at us, and nobody more so, Mr. Speaker, than the Leader of the Opposition, who has to put up with it day in, day out.
Well, the honourable lady has made her own point with force in her own way, and I thank her for doing so. She's perfectly in order to do so, and it's on the record. Yes, a point of order. Forgive me. A point of order, Mr. Mike Wood.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The guidance that you issued to members earlier in the week drew attention both to the need for temperate language, but also to the provisions around misogynistic language as part of the respect policy. If these rules don't apply to the Leader of the Opposition, what protection can member staff and staff of the House expect where behaviour isn't broadcast live on international television?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point of order, and the simple answer to the honourable gentleman